The jungle breathed around him like a living thing. Lance Corporal Thomas Brennan pressed his cheek against the stock of his M40 rifle, feeling the familiar weight of compressed earth beneath his elbows. Quezon Combat Base sat 3 clicks behind him, close enough to hear the occasional mortar round, but far enough that nobody would hear him die if things went sideways. The tunnel entrance yawned before him like a wound in the earth, 60 meters down the slope where the elephant grass gave way to red clay and darkness. February 1971. 23 years old and already ancient in the ways that mattered. The scope brought the world into crystalline focus, reducing Vietnam to a circle of glass where life and death were separated by the width of a trigger pull. 5.5 pounds of pressure. That's all it took to send a 175-grain bullet across space at 2,600 feet per second. His spotter, Sergeant Ray Martinez, lay beside him in the hide they'd constructed before dawn. Latino kid from El Paso, pushing 30 but looking 50 after 2 tours. Martinez had the rangefinder pressed to his face, calling numbers in a whisper that barely disturbed the air. Target stationary, range 612 meters, wind negligible. You've got the shot, Brennan. Through the scope, Thomas watched the North Vietnamese officer emerge from the tunnel complex. Older than most, maybe 40, moving with the careful deliberation of a man who'd survived too many close calls. No weapon visible. Arms occupied with something Thomas couldn't quite make out at this distance. The officer knelt in the clearing, seemingly oblivious to the crosshairs centered on his sternum. Command structure, Martinez breathed. Battalion level, maybe higher. Take him. Thomas's finger found the trigger. The world narrowed to heartbeat and breath, to the space between what a man was told to do and what his soul could carry. The officer's head came up, as if sensing the attention. For one impossible moment across 600 meters of jungle air, their eyes seemed to meet. The officer wasn't alone. He was tending to someone, cradling a wounded soldier with hands that moved with practiced gentleness. A medic, maybe, or just a man trying to save a life in a war that consumed them faster than rice paddies consumed rain. Brennan, Martinez's voice carried an edge. Mission clock. You don't take this shot, I will. Thomas's breath caught. The rulebook was clear. Enemy combatant. Confirmed military target. Free fire zone. Every regulation and rule of engagement said squeeze trigger, watch the pink mist through the scope, mark one more kill in the ledger that would follow him home. Brennan. The officer looked down at the wounded man. Even at 600 meters, even through heat shimmer and scope shadow, Thomas could see the tenderness in that gesture, could see himself in it, could see Martinez, could see every grunt who'd ever held a dying friend and prayed to gods they'd stop believing in. His finger tightened. The rifle spoke once, a sound like the world cracking open. Through the scope, Thomas watched the officer's head snap back, watched the body crumple like a marionette with cut strings. Watched something small and white flutter from the dead man's chest to land in the red clay beside him. A photograph. Too far to see clearly, but Thomas's imagination filled in the details with the cruelty of perfect clarity. A wife, children, a daughter with her father's eyes. Confirmed kill, Martinez was saying, already packing the rangefinder. Let's move. NVA will have heard that. Thomas Brennan lowered his rifle and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was no longer 23. The jungle was gone. In its place, Montana winter pressed against the windows of a cabin that smelled like pine smoke and old regrets. 55 years later, and he could still see that photograph falling. The phone rang 6 times before Thomas Brennan decided to ignore it. His daughter's name glowed on the screen, same as it had for the past week. Captain Ava Brennan, United States Marine Corps, currently stationed at 29 Palms, where the Mojave Desert taught young Marines that hell came in more varieties than their Sunday school teachers had mentioned. She'd be calling about Thanksgiving again, about him flying out to California, about pretending they were the kind of family that gathered around tables and counted blessings instead of scars. He let it ring through to voicemail. The coffee in his mug had gone cold while he stared at nothing in particular, which seemed to be his primary occupation these days. 58 years old, retired from the Marines at 25, retired from the CIA at 49, retired from sobriety more times than he cared to count. The cabin in northwestern Montana suited him fine. 300 acres of wilderness where the nearest neighbor was a 2-hour hike, and the only witness to his daily failures was a bull elk that occasionally wandered past the porch. The photograph sat on the mantel where it had sat for 30 years. Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves, killed in action, Fallujah 2004, distinguished service to country and corps. Thomas's best friend from the CIA days, back when they'd both been young enough to believe the lies they told themselves about necessary evils and acceptable losses. Michael had saved Thomas's life in Kabul in 2002, dragging him out of a building 3 seconds before it became a crater. Thomas had returned the favor in Baghdad by holding Michael's hand while they waited for the medevac that arrived too late. Michael's daughter had joined the Marines at 18. Ava, named after her grandmother, raised by an aunt after her father died and her mother disappeared into prescription bottles and sealed coffins of her own making. Thomas had watched from a distance as the girl became a woman, became a warrior, had sent cards on birthdays, showed up drunk to her boot camp graduation, been politely uninvited from her commissioning ceremony after the incident with the champagne fountain. She still called. He never knew whether to admire her persistence or pity her delusion. The second phone buzzed. Not the smartphone Ava had sent him last Christmas, still in its box in the closet because Thomas Brennan didn't trust anything that knew more about him than he knew about it. This was the other phone, the black one, the one that wasn't supposed to exist and definitely wasn't supposed to ring anymore. He stared at it for 3 buzzes before his hand moved of its own accord. No caller ID, no name, just coordinates in the text preview. 48 degrees, 52 minutes north, 114 degrees, 16 minutes west. His own location, down to the meter. Thomas's hand found the Kimber 1911 he kept in the kitchen drawer, 9 years old and cleaned weekly despite never being fired outside the range. Old habits, the kind that kept you alive in Kabul and Belgrade, and a dozen other cities where American bullets solved problems American diplomacy created. The text expanded, Operation Kingfisher. They know, coming for you, trust no one. No signature. Didn't need one. Thomas had seen this particular communication protocol exactly once, during a training session in 1984, when CIA had decided their field operatives needed a dead man's switch. A way to warn each other when the sharks they swam with smelled blood in the water. He hadn't thought anyone remembered Kingfisher. Hell, he'd spent 39 years trying to forget it himself. The photograph on the mantel seemed to judge him. Michael would have laughed at the paranoia, would have told him it was probably some junior analyst playing games with retired assets. Michael would have been wrong. Michael was good at being wrong about the important things, which was probably why he died believing his country gave a damn about him. Thomas moved to the window. Early November in Montana meant darkness came early and stayed late. The forest beyond his porch was a wall of shadow where anything could hide, where anyone could wait. The cabin exploded outward in a bloom of orange fire that turned night to noon. Thomas had been moving before his conscious mind registered the threat, old training overriding arthritis and age. He went through the window in a shower of glass, hit the ground rolling, came up running with the Kimber leading the way. Behind him, the cabin that had been his sanctuary for 9 years folded in on itself like a dying star. The heat chased him into the tree line, singing the hair on the back of his neck. Secondary explosions, ammo cooking off in the gun safe, propane tanks rupturing, the sound of a life burning away. Thomas pressed his back against a lodgepole pine and forced his breathing to slow. Combat discipline, the kind that came back like riding a bicycle, even when the bicycle was 30 years old and the rider's knees sounded like gravel in a blender. Professional work, shape charges, probably C4, placed at load-bearing points, meant to look like a gas leak for exactly the length of time it took to cremate whoever was inside and destroy any evidence that might suggest otherwise. The kind of work that required access, expertise, and authorization from people who could make entire operations disappear from official record. The kind of work Thomas himself had done in a previous life, in countries whose names he'd signed ND, as promising never to mention. Kingfisher. They'd sent a wet works team. The satellite phone was in the truck, parked half a mile down the access road, because Thomas had learned young that you never parked where you slept. But the truck keys were in the cabin, currently undergoing spontaneous cremation, along with every other physical thing he'd owned. The go bag was in the barn, assuming the barn hadn't also been rigged, which seemed like assuming a lot given the efficiency of the opposition. He moved through the forest like a ghost, placing each foot with the care of a man who'd spent too many nights in too many jungles where a snapped twig meant a bullet. The Kimber felt good in his hand, familiar, an old friend who'd aged better than Thomas had. The barn stood dark and intact, Either they hadn't found it or they wanted him to think they hadn't. Thomas circled wide, checking sightlines, looking for the telltale signs of an ambush. Nothing, just darkness and the smell of horses that had been dead for 5 years because Thomas couldn't stand to own anything that depended on him not to fail. The go bag was where he'd left it, buried under 3 feet of dirt beneath the hayloft. 50,000 in cash. 3 passports, all different names, all with his face from a decade ago before the crow's feet became canyons. A clean pistol, ammunition, water purification tablets, the essentials for a man who might need to become someone else in a hurry. And Martinez's card. Ray Martinez, retired Force Recon, living somewhere in Wyoming with his grandkids, in his government pension, in his wheelchair, because Kandahar had taken his legs but not his life. The card was 15 years old, edges soft with handling, phone number written in Martinez's meticulous block letters. Thomas's hands shook as he dug out the satellite phone. Not fear, not exactly. Something older and colder. Something that lived in the space between what a man had done and what he could never undo. The phone rang twice before Martinez answered. Yeah, one word, but Thomas heard volumes in it. Heard suspicion and readiness in the kind of instant alertness that came from a life lived on the edge of violence. Ray, it's Thomas. Silence. Then breathing. Then a sound like furniture moving and a door closing. Jesus Christ, Brennan. You're supposed to be dead. Saw it on the news 3 hours ago. Gas leak at a remote cabin in Montana. 1 fatality. Dental records pending. I haven't been to a dentist in 8 years. Yeah, that tracks. Martinez's voice was different now. Quieter. The voice of a man remembering how to be a soldier. What happened? Kingfisher. The silence stretched so long, Thomas thought the connection had dropped. When Martinez spoke again, his voice was different, older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. That was 40 years ago. Everyone involved is dead or drawing Social Security. Someone's cleaning house anyway. You sure? Thomas looked back toward where his cabin had been. The glow was fading now, settling into the kind of steady burn that would consume everything down to the foundation. Somewhere in that fire was his D-2-14, his CIA service record, every piece of paper that proved Thomas Brennan had existed. They turned me into a dental record, Ray. Yeah, I'm sure. Another pause. Thomas heard keyboard clicks, heard Martinez doing what Martinez had always done best. Gathering intelligence, building the picture, finding the pattern in the chaos. You got somewhere to go? Working on it. The girl, Michael's kid, she's still stationed at 29 Palms? Thomas's jaw tightened. Leave her out of this. Little late for that. If they're killing Kingfisher personnel, they'll use family as leverage. You know the playbook. Hell, you helped write it. Thomas did know, had used it himself in Jakarta and La Paz, and a dozen other places where the enemy had families, and families had pressure points. The specificity of his own medicine tasted like copper and regret. How long since you talked to her? 6 days. She called about Thanksgiving. Call her now, warn her. And tell her what? That her dead father's best friend, who she hasn't seen sober in a decade, is calling to say CIA Black Ops teams might be targeting her because of a mission she's never heard of. Yeah, Martinez said flatly. Tell her exactly that. Because the alternative is she ends up like you almost did tonight, except she won't see it coming. Thomas closed his eyes. Saw Ava at 8 years old crying at her father's funeral while Thomas stood in the back row and tried not to throw up from the bourbon he'd had for breakfast. Saw her at 18, ramrod straight in her dress blues, at boot camp graduation, not looking at him even once. Saw her at 22, commissioning ceremony, the aunt very politely explaining that perhaps it would be best if Uncle Thomas sent his congratulations in writing. He'd done that, sent a card, Hallmark, generic, nothing personal because what could he say? Congratulations on joining a profession that will either kill you or turn you into something your father wouldn't recognize. She'd sent a thank you note anyway. 2 lines, correct military courtesy and nothing more. Thomas, Martinez's voice pulled him back. You still there? Yeah. Make the call, then get moving. I'll make some calls too. See who's still breathing from the old crew. Ray. Yeah. The cabin they hit. They did it right. Professional. Not contractors, not freelance. This was company. Another silence. Then Martinez said the thing they were both thinking. Then we're already dead. We just don't know it yet. The connection dropped. Thomas stood in the barn that smelled like ghost horses and looked at his daughter's number in his phone. 26 years old. Marine Corps intelligence officer. 3 tours in sandbox countries that had no good guys, only varying shades of bad. Smart enough to make captain before her peers. Smart enough to stay alive in places designed to kill people. Not smart enough to know her dead father's best friend was about to drag her into a war she didn't know existed. Thomas made the call. The phone rang 4 times. Thomas counted each one, measured them against the pounding of his heart that had nothing to do with the exertion of his escape. On the 5th ring, he was ready to accept the mercy of voicemail, to leave a message vague enough to be dismissed as the rambling of a drunk old man. She answered on 6. Captain Brennan, professional, clipped. The voice of a woman who answered her phone at 11:30 at night because Marines didn't have the luxury of business hours. Thomas opened his mouth and found his throat had forgotten how to make words. Hello, Ava, it's Thomas. The pause was long enough to drive a convoy through. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Still professional, but cooler now. The temperature of liquid nitrogen. Mr. Brennan, it's late. Mr. Brennan. Not Uncle Thomas. Not even just Thomas. The formality was a wall, brick by brick, built over years of disappointments and broken promises. I need you to listen very carefully. Don't react. Don't acknowledge anything I'm saying beyond yes or no. Are you somewhere private? Another pause. He heard her moving, heard a door close, heard the quality of the ambient sound change from office to somewhere smaller. A supply closet, maybe, or a bathroom. Somewhere a Marine captain could talk without being overheard. Yes. Are you armed? What kind of question is that? Yes or no, Ava? Yes, I'm on a military base, Thomas. What's going on? Thomas looked at the fire in the distance, looked at the go bag at his feet, looked at his hands and saw they were shaking again. Your father and I worked together. Before Fallujah, jobs that don't have official records. One of those jobs just came back. People are dying. They tried to kill me tonight. Silence. Not shock, he realized. Assessment. She was running through possibilities, evaluating threat matrices, doing what she'd been trained to do. Define tried. Blew up my cabin with me, theoretically inside. Professional work, company level. The company doesn't operate domestically. The company does whatever serves the company's interests. You know that. He heard her breathing, heard the sound of a weapon being checked, the distinctive metallic slide of a round being chambered. Why are you calling me? Because they'll use you to get to me. Because you're Michael's daughter and that makes you leverage. Because you deserve to know someone painted a target on your back through no fault of your own. My father died in Fallujah in 2004, IED. There was a funeral. I was 12. I was there, back row. You wore a black dress your aunt bought because your mother couldn't get out of bed. Another pause. Longer this time. You were drunk. Yeah, I was. You smelled like a distillery and you left before the reception. Yeah. So forgive me if I'm skeptical about taking life advice from a man who couldn't stay sober for my father's funeral. The words landed like body shots. Thomas took them because he deserved them, because they were true, because there was no defense against the truth. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust your training. Trust your gut. If anything feels wrong, if anyone approaches you with questions about your father or about me, you run. You don't engage. You don't investigate. You run. I'm a Marine Corps officer, Thomas. I don't run. Your father was a Marine Corps officer, too. They found enough of him to fill a coffee can. Pride's expensive, Ava. Sometimes the price is your life. He heard her breath catch. Knew he'd gone too far. Known he would anyway, because subtlety had never been his strong suit. I have to go. Ava, wait. No, I don't know what you're involved in, and I don't want to know. My father made his choices. You made yours. I'm making mine, and my choice is to stay out of whatever paranoid delusion you're living in. Check the news. Montana. Cabin fire. They'll ID the body as me within 48 hours. Maybe you should have died in that fire. Maybe it would have been better for everyone. The line went dead. Thomas stood in the barn and listened to the silence. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called. Somewhere closer, sirens were starting to approach, drawn by the column of smoke that marked the end of one life and the beginning of whatever came next. He shouldered the go bag and started walking. Wyoming was 300 miles south. Martinez would have a plan. Martinez always had a plan. And if the plan failed, well, Thomas Brennan had been living on borrowed time since Quezon anyway. The coordinates from the text message burned in his memory. His own location. They'd known exactly where to find him, known exactly when to strike, known everything except that Thomas Brennan had learned young to never sleep where he parked. Kingfisher, 1985. Afghanistan during the Soviet occupation. Thomas had been 37 years old and still believed in things like mission objectives and acceptable casualties. The target was a Soviet colonel named Dmitry Volkov, Spetsnaz commander, responsible for massacres in 3 villages, wanted by every intelligence service with alphabet soup for a name. The shot had been perfect. 1,200 meters across a mountain pass, wind at 8 miles per hour, temperature hovering just above freezing. Thomas had squeezed the trigger and watched through the scope as Volkov's head came apart in pink mist. He'd also watched a child fall. 12 years old, maybe 13, a girl who'd been standing next to her father learning to shoot like Thomas had learned from his own father in the forests of Pennsylvania. The bullet had gone through Volkov and into his daughter, through and through, center mass. CIA had called it acceptable collateral, had classified the entire operation above top secret, had promoted Thomas to a desk job in Langley where he'd spent 6 years drinking and pretending the girl's face didn't visit him in dreams. Her name had been Natasha. Thomas learned that later from a file he wasn't supposed to see. Natasha Volkov, 12 years old, survived her wounds, disappeared into the Soviet system, presumed recruited by GRU or SVR, presumed dead by 1992 when the Soviet Union collapsed and half their intelligence apparatus scattered like roaches when the light came on. Presumed wrong, apparently. Thomas made it 2 miles before the headlights found him. The SUV came fast, no attempt at stealth, high beams painting the forest road in stark white light. Thomas stepped into the trees and brought the Kimber up in a 2-handed grip that his wrists immediately protested. The vehicle stopped, engine running, driver's door opened. "Get in, you paranoid son of a bitch." Ray Martinez sat at the driver's seat of a modified Ram truck with hand controls and a wheelchair hoist. 80 years old and looking every day of it, face like a roadmap of bad decisions and good fights. The kind of face that made young punks think twice about being young punks. Thomas lowered the pistol. "I told you, Wyoming." "Yeah, well, I got impatient. Also, I figured if they hit you tonight, they might hit me tomorrow. Decided to collect you before they collected me." Thomas climbed into the passenger seat. The truck smelled like coffee and gun oil and the particular staleness of a vehicle that had become a second home. "Where are we going?" "Bozeman. Got something you need to see." "Ray, shut up and let me drive. You can do your 1,000-yard stare on your own time." They drove in silence. Martinez handled the modified controls with the ease of 15 years' practice. The wheelchair in the back was expensive, motorized, the kind the VA didn't pay for, which meant Martinez had paid for it himself. Kandahar had taken his legs in 2009, IED on a patrol that shouldn't have happened in a war that shouldn't have lasted. Martinez had been 64 years old, too old for combat. Not too old to volunteer when they'd needed experienced NCOs to train the Afghan National Army. The doctors said he'd never walk again. Martinez said the doctors could go to hell. He'd learned to walk anyway after a fashion, with prosthetics that cost more than most people's cars. But the chair was for long days and bad weather, and times when pride mattered less than practicality. "You look like shit," Martinez said after 20 miles. "Feeling pretty shit, so that tracks. When's the last time you ate?" Thomas tried to remember. "Yesterday, maybe." "When's the last time you had a drink?" 6 months, 2 weeks, 3 days. Martinez glanced at him. "You counting?" "Every goddamn minute." "Good. Keep counting." They passed a sign for Bozeman. Martinez took the exit toward downtown, navigated surface streets with the confidence of familiarity. "You've been here before," Thomas said. "Once a month for this past 3 years. There's a safety deposit box at First Security Bank. Box 447. I've been adding to it." "Adding what?" Martinez pulled into a parking garage, killed the engine, sat into the darkness with his hands still on the controls. "Insurance. The kind that keeps old men alive when people with bigger guns want them dead." He turned to look at Thomas. In the dim light from the street, his face was all angles and shadows. "Kingfisher wasn't what we thought it was. The Soviet colonel, yeah, he was there. But there were 17 other people in that compound. Afghans, civilians, village elders meeting with Volkov to negotiate safe passage for refugees. CIA knew. Langley knew. They sent you anyway." Thomas's hands tightened into fists. "Why?" "Because one of those village elders was also Taliban leadership. Or became Taliban leadership after we pushed the Soviets out and the power vacuum swallowed the country whole. Point is, Langley wanted him dead. Wanted all of them dead. Made it look like a Soviet massacre, blamed Volkov, Let the Afghans tear themselves apart fighting over who got to be the next warlord. You're saying I was a patsy. I'm saying you were a weapon. They pointed you and you fired, like you'd been trained, like we all were. Martinez opened his door, began the process of transferring to his wheelchair. Thomas sat frozen, looking at hands that had killed 17 people. Hands that had killed a child. Hands that were shaking again. The girl, Thomas said quietly. Volkov's daughter, she survived. Yeah, grew up angry, grew up trained, grew up into exactly the kind of asset Soviet intelligence loved. Precision sniper, zero conscience, 43 confirmed kills before the Soviet Union fell and she went freelance. How do you know this? Because I've been tracking Kingfisher personnel for 3 years. 7 dead so far, all made to look like accidents. Car crashes, heart attacks, suicides. But the pattern's there if you know how to look. Martinez was fully in his chair now, rolling toward the elevator. Thomas followed, mind spinning through implications. Why didn't you warn me sooner? Because I thought I had more time. Thought she was working chronologically. You were the shooter, Thomas. You should have been first. Instead, you're number 8, which means something changed, some variable I didn't account for. The elevator took them to ground level. First Security Bank sat on the corner, dark and closed for the night. Martinez rolled to the after-hours entrance, used a key card Thomas didn't ask about. Inside, the safety deposit room hummed with fluorescent silence. Martinez navigated to box 447, used 2 keys, pulled out a box that seemed too heavy for its size. Everything's in here. Files I shouldn't have, photos I shouldn't have taken, recordings of conversations that never officially happened. He looked up at Thomas, and one thing Michael left for his daughter, made me promise to give it to her if anything happened to him. Michael died in 2004, 17 years ago. Yeah, and I've been carrying his last words for 17 years, waiting for the right time. Guess the right time's now. Martinez opened the box. Inside, Thomas saw documents, hard drives, photographs, and a sealed envelope with Ava written in Michael's handwriting. She won't listen to me, Thomas said. Then we make her listen, because in about 48 hours, when they odd your body, Natasha Volkov's going to realize she missed. And when she realizes that, she's going to come for what you care about most. I don't have anything I care about. Martinez held up the envelope. Yeah, you do. You've just been too drunk and too scared to admit it. Thomas took the envelope, felt the weight of it, felt 17 years of unsaid words and unfinished business. Michael knew, Martinez continued, knew about Kingfisher, knew what it cost you. He made me promise that if the past ever came back, I'd make sure Ava understood. Make sure she knew her father died for something more than oil and politics. He died for nothing. We all did. We all do. Maybe, but she deserves to know what kind of nothing. Deserves to decide for herself what it means. Thomas looked at the envelope, looked at Martinez, looked at the box full of secrets that could get them both killed. They'll come for you, too, for knowing this. Let them come. I'm 80 years old, got no legs, and I'm meaner than cat piss. Besides, I always wanted to go out shooting. Beats dying in some VA hospital hooked to machines that beep. Despite everything, Thomas smiled. You're insane. Yeah, well, sanity's overrated. Got me through 2 wars and 60 years of marriage. Insanity's what kept me alive. They loaded the contents of the box into a duffel bag. Martinez locked everything up, led the way back to the truck. Dawn was starting to paint the eastern sky in shades of purple and gold. 29 Palms is 18 hours south, Martinez said. We drive in shifts. Get there by tomorrow evening. She won't see us. Then we make her. Because like it or not, she's in this now. Michael's daughter, your responsibility, our last mission. Thomas climbed into the truck. Through the windshield, he could see the mountains where he'd lived for 9 years, alone with his ghosts and his failures. Could see the smoke still rising from his cabin, marking the spot where Thomas Brennan had died. The man sitting in this truck was someone else, someone older, someone who'd run out of places to hide. Martinez started the engine. You ready for this? Thomas thought about Ava at her father's funeral, thought about the girl in Kherson, thought about Natasha Volkov and the bullet that had taken her childhood and replaced it with rage. No, he said honestly, but I stopped being ready for anything around 1971. Might as well die doing something useful. That's the spirit. Now shut up and navigate. My eyes aren't what they used to be. They pulled out of the parking garage as the sun broke over the mountains. Behind them, Bozeman woke to another day. Ahead, California waited with answers neither of them wanted and questions they'd spent decades avoiding. In the duffel bag between them, Michael's letter sat silent. Whatever words he'd left for his daughter had waited 17 years. They could wait 18 more hours. The highway stretched ahead like a promise or a threat. At this point, Thomas Brennan had stopped being able to tell the difference. The desert highway unspooled like a ribbon of heat shimmer and broken dreams. Thomas Brennan watched America scroll past the passenger window, each mile marker a countdown to a conversation he'd been avoiding for 17 years. Martinez drove with the steady competence of a man who'd navigated worse terrain under worse conditions, hands steady on the modified controls, eyes scanning the road with the perpetual vigilance of someone who'd learned that complacency killed faster than enemy fire. They'd been driving for 11 hours, stopped twice for gas and bathroom breaks, spoke maybe 40 words between them. The duffel bag with Michael's letter sat in the back seat like a passenger they both pretended not to notice. Thomas had picked it up 3 times, turned the envelope over in his hands, tried to summon the courage to break the seal. Each time, he'd put it back unopened. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. Idaho gave way to Utah. Utah gave way to Nevada. The landscape transformed from pine forests to salt flats to the kind of emptiness that made a man realize just how small he was in the grand scheme of geological time. Thomas had always felt comfortable in empty places. Fewer people meant fewer chances to fail them. "You planning to actually read that letter or just stare at it until it bursts into flames?" Martinez asked somewhere around the Nevada-California border. Thomas realized he'd been holding the envelope again. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, sealed with wax that bore the imprint of Michael's wedding ring. A circle with a cross. Catholic boy from Boston who'd believed in saints and redemption right up until Fallujah proved him wrong about both. "What if I don't want to know?" "Then you're a coward, but I already knew that." Thomas looked at his old friend. Martinez's profile was all hard angles and harder truths, the kind of face that told stories in scars and sun damage. 80 years old and still meaner than a rattlesnake with a toothache. "I was there when he wrote it," Martinez continued. "Baghdad, 2003. We all knew Fallujah was coming. Knew it was going to be bad. Michael pulled me aside one night, gave me the envelope, made me promise. Said if he didn't make it, I had to give it to Ava when she was old enough to understand." Understand what? That her father wasn't the hero they'd tell her he was. That he was just a man who made choices and lived with them until he couldn't anymore. The words landed like artillery. Thomas felt them impact, felt the shrapnel work its way under his skin. He broke the seal. The wax crumbled like dead leaves. Inside, 3 pages of Michael's handwriting, dense and certain, the penmanship of a man who'd been taught by nuns to make every letter perfect. Thomas read in silence while Martinez drove. Read words that had been waiting in darkness for 17 years. Read a confession and an apology, and a father's last attempt to explain the inexplicable to a daughter who'd been 12 years old and crying at a funeral. When he finished, Thomas folded the pages carefully and put them back in the envelope. His hands were shaking. His eyes were wet. He was 58 years old and crying in a truck in the middle of Nevada because his best friend's last words were better than any words Thomas had ever managed to say to anyone. "He knew about Kingfisher," Thomas said finally. "Knew what really happened. Knew about the 17 civilians. Knew I'd been set up." Michael knew a lot of things. Spent his last 2 years trying to prove it. Collected evidence, made recordings, was going to blow the whistle on the whole program. And they killed him for it. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. The road hummed beneath them. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. IED in Fallujah. That's what the official report says. But Michael was intelligence, wasn't supposed to be outside the wire, wasn't supposed to be in that convoy. Someone made sure he was. Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. Colder than fear, colder than rage. The kind of cold that came from realizing you'd been living in a lie so big you couldn't see its edges. Who? That's what the files in the duffel are going to tell us. That's what Michael died trying to expose. That's what's going to keep Ava alive or get her killed, depending on what she does with it. They crossed into California as true dark fell. The desert gave way to mountains, gave way to more desert. 29 Palms sat in the high desert northeast of Los Angeles, a sprawl of military base and civilian town bound together by the logic of young Marines needing places to spend their paychecks on the wrong things. Thomas had been stationed here in his 20s, back when his knees worked and his liver wasn't staging a slow rebellion. Martinez pulled into a truck stop 10 miles from the base, cut the engine, sat in the sudden silence like a man gathering strength for what came next. "She's not going to want to see you," Martinez said. "I know. She's going to tell us to leave." "I know. And when she does, you're going to show her that letter anyway, because her wanting to stay ignorant doesn't make her any less of a target." "I know." Martinez turned to look at him full on. In the sodium vapor light from the truck stop, his face looked carved from stone. Ancient, implacable. "Michael was my friend too, my brother. He saved my life in Kabul, carried me out of a building after I took shrapnel to both legs, held pressure on the wounds for 40 minutes while we waited for medevac. I owe him everything." "Ray, so I'm going in there with you. I'm backing your play. But if you fuck this up, if you get drunk or stupid or both, I will personally wheel this chair over your unconscious body and finish the mission myself. We clear?" "Crystal." "Good. Now help me with this chair before my ass goes completely numb." They found Captain Ava Brennan in the base gym at 2200 hours, working a heavy bag like it owed her money. Thomas watched through the window as she moved, all economy and controlled violence, each punch a statement of intent. She wore PT gear and dog tags in the kind of focus that came from trying to hit something hard enough to forget everything else. She'd grown into her father's face, same strong jaw, same eyes that looked like they could see through bullshit from 1,000 meters. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, dark and shot through with premature gray that probably came from 3 combat tours before her 27th birthday. She was taller than Thomas remembered, stronger, harder. Martinez wheeled up beside him. "She's good. She's pissed. Same thing usually." They waited until she finished her round. Waited while she unwrapped her hands with the methodical care of someone who'd learned that damaged hands meant damaged effectiveness. Waited while she toweled off and reached for her water bottle. That's when she saw them. The recognition was instant. Thomas watched it happen, watched her face go through shock and confusion and land somewhere in the neighborhood of cold fury. She crossed the gym in long strides that ate distance like a predator closing on prey. "You've got 10 seconds to explain why you're on this base before I call the MPS. "Ava," Thomas raised his hands in what he hoped was a placating gesture. "We need to talk." "No, we don't. I told you on the phone. I'm not interested in your paranoid delusions." "Your father's last words," Martinez said quietly. "You interested in those?" That stopped her. Thomas saw the calculation behind her eyes. Saw her trying to place Martinez, trying to figure out the angle, trying to maintain the defensive perimeter she'd built around herself. "Who are you?" "Ray Martinez, Force Recon, served with your father in Afghanistan and Iraq. Was with him when he wrote you a letter, been carrying it for 17 years waiting for the right time to deliver it. My father died in 2004. "Yeah, he did. And his last thoughts were about you, about making sure you understood why he did what he did, about making sure you had the truth even if the truth was ugly." Ava looked between them. Thomas could see her training warring with her curiosity, could see the Marine captain who followed protocols battling with the daughter who'd lost her father when she was 12 and never got answers. "I'm off duty in 15 minutes. There's a diner outside the main gate. You buy me dinner, you get 15 minutes of my time. Then you leave, and you don't contact me again." She walked away before either of them could respond. Thomas watched her go, watched the rigid set of her shoulders, the controlled aggression in every movement. "She's got Michael's temper," Martinez observed. "She's got his courage too. That's what worries me." The diner was the kind of place that had probably looked exactly the same since 1987. Red vinyl booths with duct tape patches, laminated menus advertising breakfast served all day, coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the Reagan administration and kept warm ever since. A waitress who looked like she'd seen every possible variation of young Marine stupidity and wasn't impressed by any of it. Ava slid into the booth across from them. She changed into civilian clothes, jeans and a plain black t-shirt, but somehow still radiated military bearing. The dog tags around her neck caught the fluorescent light. Thomas saw they were her father's tags, worn thin from years of handling. Martinez put the envelope on the table between them. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The diner hummed with the white noise of other conversations, other lives, other people who weren't sitting at a table with ghosts. "Before you read that," Thomas said, "you need to understand context. I need to understand why you're here. Why now? Why you've spent 17 years avoiding me, And suddenly you're in my face acting like the sky is falling. Because the sky is falling. Because someone tried to kill me 2 nights ago. Because your father didn't die in an IED attack. Because there's a woman named Natasha Volkov who's been killing everyone connected to an operation called Kingfisher, and you just became next on the list. Ava's expression didn't change, didn't flicker. She just looked at Thomas with those eyes that were too much like Michael's and said, "Prove it." Martinez pulled out a tablet. Ancient thing, probably 5 years old, but functional. He called up a news article. Montana cabin explosion. 1 fatality. Dental records pending. That's Thomas's cabin. That's supposed to be Thomas's body. Except Thomas is sitting here eating pie that tastes like cardboard. So clearly somebody made a mistake. Could be a coincidence. Could be, except for these. Martinez swiped through images. 7 photographs. 7 men. 7 death certificates spread across 3 years. Car accident in Virginia. Heart attack in Maryland. Suicide in Colorado. Hunting accident in Montana. House fire in Texas. Boating accident in Florida. Fall from a hotel balcony in Nevada. All former CIA, all connected to Operation Kingfisher. All dead in ways that look accidental until you run the statistical analysis and realize the probability of 7 men from the same unit dying accidentally within a 3-year window is roughly the same as winning the lottery twice while getting struck by lightning. Ava studied the photos. Thomas watched her process, watched her training kick in, watched her start to see the pattern. What was Kingfisher? Afghanistan, 1985, Thomas said. Soviet occupation. CIA sent me to kill a Spetsnaz colonel named Dmitry Volkov, war criminal, mass murderer. Legitimate target by any definition. What they didn't tell me was that Volkov was meeting with 17 Afghan civilians, village elders, trying to negotiate safe passage for refugees. You killed them all. The bullet that killed Volkov went through him and hit his 12-year-old daughter. She was standing next to him, learning to shoot like I'd learned from my father. Like you learned from yours. Thomas paused. She survived, barely. Soviet intelligence recruited her, trained her, turned her into exactly what you'd expect. A weapon with a very specific target list. Ava was quiet for a long time. The waitress brought coffee none of them had ordered. It sat cooling between them like a neutral party. My father knew about this? Your father was intelligence. He figured it out, started collecting evidence, was going to expose the whole program. Then Fallujah happened and suddenly Michael Reeves was just another casualty in a war that ate people and spit out dog tags. You think they killed him? I think the timing was convenient. I think Michael had information powerful people wanted buried. I think he's buried instead. Ava picked up the envelope, turned it over, saw the wax seal with her father's wedding ring imprint. Her hands were steady, but Thomas could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set like she was preparing to take a punch. What does this have to do with me? They'll use you to get to me, Thomas said. That's what I would do. That's what they're trained to do. Find the leverage point and apply pressure until something breaks. I'm a Marine Corps officer. I don't break. Your father was a Marine Corps officer. They shipped him home in pieces. The words came out harder than Thomas intended. Ava flinched like he'd slapped her. Martinez put a hand on Thomas's arm, the grip tight enough to hurt. What Thomas is trying to say, in his spectacularly terrible way, is that we're trying to keep you alive. Your father would want that. Hell, your father died trying to make sure you'd have a future worth living in. Ava opened the envelope. Thomas looked away while she read, looked out the diner window at the parking lot, at the desert beyond, at the mountains in the distance that looked black against the stars. Looked anywhere except at the face of a woman reading her dead father's last words. He heard her breathing change, heard the paper rustle as her hands started to shake, heard a sound that might have been a sob caught and swallowed before it could escape. When he finally looked back, Ava's face was wet. The letter lay on the table between them, 3 pages of Michael's perfect handwriting, and Thomas could see tears had smudged the ink in places. He says he's sorry, Ava whispered. Says he's sorry for leaving me. Says he's sorry for choosing duty over safety. Says he's sorry for not being there to see me grow up. Michael was good at being sorry, Martinez said gently. What he wasn't good at was walking away from a fight, even when the fight was bigger than him. He says there are things he can't tell me, classified things, things that would put me in danger just from knowing. But he wants me to know he believed in something, that his death, if it comes, will mean something. She looked up at Thomas. Her eyes were red but clear, focused. Did it? Did his death mean something? Thomas wanted to lie, wanted to tell her yes, absolutely. Her father died a hero and changed the world and made everything better. But he'd spent too many years drowning in comfortable lies to start swimming in them again now. I don't know. He tried, he fought. He collected evidence against people who've spent billions of dollars making sure their crimes stay hidden. Whether that meant something depends on what you do with what he left behind. What did he leave behind? Martinez pulled out the tablet again. This time he called up file directories, encrypted documents, audio recordings, photographs, bank records, communication logs, a digital paper trail that connected names Thomas recognized to operations he'd participated in to outcomes he'd been told were classified. Your father spent 2 years building this, a map of every illegal operation, every covered-up war crime, every assassination disguised as enemy action. He was going to take it to Congress, to the press, to anyone who'd listen. Then Fallujah happened. And you think he was killed to keep this quiet? I think 17 years is a long time to carry a secret this big. I think someone's decided it's time to clean house. I think that cabin explosion was supposed to be the end of Thomas Brennan and the beginning of tying up every loose end. Ava looked at the files, looked at the letter, looked at Thomas and Martinez like she was seeing them clearly for the first time. If I help you, I'm committing treason, accessing classified information without authorization, conspiracy to expose state secrets. If you don't help us, you're dead, Thomas said flatly. Maybe not tonight, maybe not next week, but Natasha Volkov doesn't leave loose ends. She spent 39 years perfecting the art of revenge. You're her leverage against me, which means you're already a target whether you like it or not. Then I'll request protective custody. I'll report the threat through proper channels. Proper channels are how they found me. Proper channels are how they killed 7 other men. Proper channels only work when the people running them aren't dirty. You're asking me to trust you, a man who hasn't been sober for more than 6 months in the last 20 years. A man who couldn't show up for my life when it mattered. A man who's essentially a stranger. I'm not asking you to trust me, Thomas said. I'm asking you to trust your father. He trusted me enough to make sure you got that letter. Trusted Martinez enough to carry it for 17 years. Whatever we are, whatever we've failed to be, we're what your father left you. We're the insurance policy he bought with his life. The diner was emptying out. Midnight approached, and with it the curfew that sent young Marines back to base or into whatever trouble they could find in the desert. The waitress brought a check nobody had asked for. Martinez paid in cash, over-tipping, because that's what you did when you might not come back. Outside, the desert air was cold. November in the high desert meant temperature swings that could freeze you after sundown. Ava stood in the parking lot looking up at stars that seemed closer here than anywhere else on Earth. I need time to think. We don't have time, Thomas said. Every hour we wait is an hour they use to set up the next move. Then you'll have to wait anyway, because I'm not making a decision this big on 2 hours sleep and emotional manipulation. She started toward her car. Thomas called after her. Ava. She turned. Your father's letter, the last page, did you read it? I read all of it. Then you know what he wanted, what he was willing to die for. He wanted me to be better than him, to not make his mistakes, to live a life that mattered for reasons beyond following orders. Yeah, he did. So what are you going to do about it? Ava's face was unreadable in the darkness. She could have been 12 years old at a funeral, or 26 and hardened by war. She could have been anyone. Could have. I'm going to sleep on it. I'm going to review the evidence. And tomorrow I'm going to make a decision. But understand this. She took a step closer. If you're lying to me, if this is some kind of manipulation or con or sick game, I will end you. Not arrest you, not report you, end you. We clear? Crystal, Thomas said, using Martinez's word. Good. Now get off this base before I change my mind about not calling the MPS. They watched her drive away, taillights disappearing into the desert night. Martinez and Thomas stood in the parking lot like 2 old men who'd run out of moves. That went well, Martinez said. She didn't shoot us. I'm calling it a win. She's going to help. She's Michael's daughter. Can't walk away from a fight any more than he could. That's what I'm afraid of. They found a motel on the edge of town. The kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions as long as the cash was green. Martinez took the bed. Thomas took the floor because old habits and older guilt meant he'd stopped believing he deserved comfort. Sleep didn't come. Thomas lay in the darkness and stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks in the plaster until they formed constellations of failure. Somewhere in the desert, Ava was reading her father's words again. Somewhere in the world, Natasha Volkov was planning her next move. Somewhere in Washington, people in expensive suits were making phone calls about problems that needed permanent solutions. His phone buzzed at 0300, unknown number. Thomas stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Brennan, static, then breathing. Then a voice he'd heard exactly once, 39 years ago, screaming in Russian as a bullet tore through her shoulder. Colonel Brennan, I've been looking for you. Thomas sat up. Martinez was awake instantly. Decades of combat training, making sleep a tactical choice rather than a biological necessity. Natasha, you remember my name. I'm touched. Most men who kill children don't bother learning what they were called. I didn't know you were there. Ignorance is not innocence. You pulled the trigger. My father died. I died. In the ways that matter. We all died that day in the mountains. What do you want? What I've always wanted. What I've spent my entire life training for. Precision. The kind you're famous for. The kind that ends things cleanly. If you're going to kill me, stop talking and do it. Oh, I'm not going to kill you, Coronel. I'm going to take everything you care about. Everyone you love. I'm going to make you watch them die knowing it's your fault. That your sins are why they suffer. Then, when you're hollow and broken and begging for it to end, then I'll grant you the mercy of a bullet. I don't have anyone. You have the girl, Michael Reeves's daughter. I've been watching her, strong, capable. Her father's eyes. He was a good man, Michael. Tried to stop what you started, tried to expose the truth. They killed him for it. Thomas felt ice in his veins. You killed him. No, but I know who did. Just like I know who's been cleaning up Kingfisher personnel. Just like I know you're not the hero in this story, Colonel. You're the villain who's been running so long, you forgot what you were running from. What do you want, Natasha? I want you to suffer. But I'm practical. I'm also tired. 40 years is a long time to carry hate. So I'm offering you a choice. You for her. Turn yourself into me. Face justice for what you did. I let Ava Brennan live. How do I know you'll keep your word? Because unlike you, Colonel, I don't kill children. I was one. I remember what it feels like. The fear, the pain, the moment you realize the world is crueler than any child should have to learn. Thomas looked at Martinez, saw his own thoughts reflected in his old friend's face. It was a trap, obviously a trap. But it was also the only play that kept Ava out of the line of fire. Where? Montana? Fort Peck Reservoir, the dam. Midnight tomorrow. Come alone. Unarmed. If I see backup, if I sense deception, she dies screaming and you live with it. I'll be there. I know you will. You're predictable, Colonel. That's always been your weakness. You follow the code even when the code leads to disaster. It's almost admirable. The line went dead. Martinez was already moving, pulling up maps on his tablet, calculating distances and travel times and tactical considerations. It's an 18-hour drive. We leave now. We get there with 6 hours to spare. I'm going alone. The hell you are. Ray, she'll kill Ava if she sees you. She'll kill you if you go alone. Then she'll kill Ava anyway because why leave witnesses? So what do you suggest? Martinez smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who'd spent 60 years learning how to kill people efficiently and wasn't above one more lesson. I suggest we go to Montana. I suggest you walk into that trap like a good little sacrifice. And I suggest I be positioned somewhere with a very good rifle and a very clear shot when this Natasha decides to change the terms. You can't shoot. Your hands shake. My hands shake. My eyes are still perfect. And I know a young Marine captain who's been hitting targets at 1,000 meters since she was 18. Michael's daughter, the girl you're trying to save. Absolutely not. I'm not putting Ava in the line of fire. She's already in the line of fire, has been since her father died. Only question is whether she faces it blind or whether she faces it with the truth and a rifle and 2 old bastards who owe her father everything. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to find a flaw in the logic, wanted to believe there was a way to do this that didn't involve dragging Ava deeper into a war she hadn't chosen. But Martinez was right. Martinez was always right. That was the problem with old friends. They knew you too well to let you lie to yourself. We need to talk to her. Yeah, and we need to do it now because in about 12 hours, everyone who wants us dead is going to converge on Montana, and I'd rather have a plan that doesn't involve improvising our way through a gunfight. They drove back to the base, called Ava's number, got voicemail, called again. On the fifth try, she answered. This better be good. It's bad, Thomas said. Natasha just called me. She wants to meet. Montana, tomorrow midnight. Me for you. Silence on the line. Then Ava's voice, sharp and focused. I'm listening. We're coming to you. Now, we need to plan this right or everyone dies. I'll meet you at the gate. The line went dead. Martinez drove while Thomas stared out the window and tried to remember when exactly he'd become the kind of man who asked children to fight his wars for him. Tried to remember if there'd been a moment he could have said no, could have walked away, could have chosen differently. Couldn't find it. The past was a straight line from Quezon to Afghanistan to this moment in the desert with death waiting in Montana and a daughter who wasn't his trying to pay debts that weren't hers. Ava was waiting at the gate in full combat gear, body armor, rifle, the flat expression of someone who'd already made a decision and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. She climbed into the back seat. Drive, talk, convince me this isn't suicide. Martinez pulled out onto the highway. The desert opened up before them. 18 hours to Montana, 18 hours to prepare for a confrontation 4 decades in the making. Thomas turned in his seat to look at Ava. Your father's letter, the last thing he wrote, what did it say? It said, be brave, be better, be the person I couldn't be. Why? Because that's what we're asking you to do. Be brave enough to face this. Be better than the people who killed your father. Be the person who ends this cycle instead of perpetuating it. Ava met his eyes. In the darkness of the truck, she looked exactly like Michael had looked in Baghdad the night before the convoy that killed him. Determined, terrified, committed despite the fear. Then let's go to Montana. Let's finish what my father started. And let's make sure the people responsible know exactly what it costs when they forget that soldiers have families too. Martinez hit the accelerator. The truck surged forward into the night. Behind them, 29 Palms disappeared into darkness. Ahead, Montana waited with questions that had answers written in blood. Thomas closed his eyes and saw the photograph falling in Quezon. Saw Michael's face in Fallujah. Saw the faces of 17 Afghan civilians who died because he'd followed orders without asking questions. In his pocket, his phone buzzed. Text message, unknown number. The girl made a choice. Now watch her pay for yours. Thomas showed it to Martinez and Ava. Watch their faces harden. Watch them transform from civilians to warriors, to the kind of people wars created when they ground long enough. 18 hours, Martinez said. We use every minute. Train her, prepare her, give her every advantage we can. And if it's not enough, Ava asked, Thomas looked at her in the rearview mirror. Then we make sure we hurt them bad enough on the way out that they remember us. The highway stretched ahead like a promise, like a threat, like the only road there'd ever been. Montana waited, and with it, the last precision any of them would ever need. The Montana sky stretched overhead like a bruise, purple and black and heavy with the weight of coming snow. Thomas Brennan stood at the edge of Fort Peck Dam and felt the November wind cut through his jacket like it was looking for bones. Behind him, 18 hours of highway. Ahead, a concrete monument to Depression-era ambition, a massive structure holding back a lake that could swallow cities. Below, darkness so complete it seemed less like absence of light and more like presence of void. Midnight was still 3 hours away. Time enough to position, time enough to plan, time enough to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Martinez sat in the truck a mile back, coordinates locked, thermal scope calibrated, breathing exercises, keeping his hands steady despite 80 years of wear and tear. The old Marine had transformed during the drive north, shed decades like a snake shedding skin, became again the shooter he'd been in Quezon and Kandahar, and a dozen other places where old men sent young men to die for reasons that sounded better in Washington than they did in the field. Ava was somewhere in the darkness. Thomas couldn't see her, which meant she'd done it right. Ghillie suit constructed from local vegetation, position selected for elevation and concealment, rifle zeroed at the range in Wyoming, where they'd stop for 6 hours to make sure she could hit what she aimed at. She'd put 10 rounds through the same hole at 1,200 meters. Her father's daughter, Martinez's student, something new and terrible that war had created from innocence and necessity. Thomas's phone buzzed, text from Martinez. Thermal scope shows 3 heat signatures, Northridge 800 meters. They're early too. So Natasha had brought backup. Smart, professional. Exactly what Thomas would have done if the roles were reversed. 3 shooters meant overlapping fields of fire, meant someone watching the approaches, meant dying would be easier than escaping. He texted back, Ava, positioned, clean line of sight, she sees them. Tell her to hold. Already did. Kid's got ice water, hasn't moved in 40 minutes. Thomas pocketed the phone and continued his slow walk across the dam. The concrete beneath his feet was old, cracked in places, marked with graffiti from generations of local kids who'd come here to drink and fight and pretend they were harder than the world that would eventually grind them down. He'd been one of those kids once in Pennsylvania, before the Marines and the CIA and the long slide into becoming something his younger self wouldn't recognize. The dam stretched nearly 4 miles, an earthen embankment topped with concrete, holding back 19 million acre-feet of water. The engineering was impressive in the way that Depression-era projects were impressive, built by men who needed work and a government that needed to prove it could still build things. 70 years later, it stood like a monument to a time when America believed in itself enough to move mountains and redirect rivers. Thomas reached the center point, the exact coordinates Natasha had specified. From here, he could see the entire lake stretching north into darkness, could see the lights of the small town of Fort Peck to the east, could see nothing at all to the west except prairie and badlands and the kind of emptiness that made a man feel very small and very temporary. He checked his watch. 2,200 hours. 2 hours to midnight. 2 hours to convince Natasha that he'd come alone. 2 hours to position every piece on the board before the shooting started. His phone rang. Not a text this time, a call. Unknown number, but he knew the voice before she spoke. Colonel Brennan, punctual as always. Natasha, I'm watching you. Thermal imaging. Very alone. Very exposed. This could end quickly if I wanted it to. But you don't want it to. You want me to suffer first. I want you to understand there's a difference. Suffering is random. Understanding is precise. I think you appreciate precision. Yes? Thomas turned slowly, scanning the darkness. Somewhere out there, Natasha Volkov watched him through a scope. Somewhere out there, her finger rested on a trigger that could end this conversation permanently. I understand you were 12 years old. I understand you didn't deserve what happened. I understand I pulled the trigger that destroyed your life. No, you pulled the trigger that created my life. The girl who existed before your bullet, she died in the mountains. What survived was something else. Something your government trained. Something your war built. I am your legacy, Colonel. Every kill I've made, every life I've taken, it all traces back to you. Then kill me and be done with it. Oh, I will. But first, I want you to see what you've created. I want you to meet the other people who've been cleaning up Kingfisher. The people who've been killing your friends. The people who decided it was time to bury the past so deep no one would ever dig it up. Movement on the dam. Thomas turned and saw them walking toward him from the east. 3 figures. One he recognized immediately by the wheelchair, even from 200 meters. Ray Martinez, being pushed by 2 men in tactical gear. Behind them, more figures. 6 total. Professional spacing, tactical formation. The kind of approach that said military training and current operational status. Thomas's hand went to the pistol at his back. Found nothing. He'd come unarmed as ordered. The Kimber was back in the truck with the Martinez, who was apparently no longer in the truck. His phone buzzed. Text from Ava. They have Martinez. 6 hostiles. Orders? Thomas typed back with hands that wanted to shake. Hold position. Do not engage. The group stopped 50 meters away. Close enough for conversation. Far enough that rushing them would be suicide. The tactical lights on their rifles painted Thomas in overlapping circles of LED brilliance. Behind the lights, faces were invisible. Professional. Clean. One of them stepped forward, tall, confident, the kind of bearing that came from command experience. When he spoke, his voice had the flat neutrality of the Midwest, the kind of accent that came from Nebraska or Iowa or one of the other states that produce soldiers like wheat. Colonel Thomas Brennan, you're a hard man to kill. Who are you? You can call me Webb, Marcus Webb, or you can call me the person who's been making sure Kingfisher stays buried. CIA, was, retired now. Private contractor, same work, better pay, fewer congressional oversight committees. Webb gestured and one of his men rolled Martinez forward. The old Marine's face was bruised, cut above one eye, but his expression was pure defiance. His eyes met Thomas's and said everything that needed saying. Sorry, ambushed. Should have seen it coming. Your friend put up quite a fight for a man with no legs. Killed two of my men before we got him sedated. I'd be impressed if it wasn't so inconvenient. Let him go. This is between you and me. Oh, this stopped being between anyone specific a long time ago. This is about institutional preservation, about making sure certain truths stay buried, about protecting people who've built careers on operations like Kingfisher. People like Senator Hale. Webb's silence was confirmation. Thomas felt pieces clicking into place. Pieces he should have seen earlier if he'd been smarter, faster, less consumed by guilt and whiskey. Hale was CIA in '85, junior officer on the Kingfisher planning team. He's the one who selected the target. Who knew about the 17 civilians? Who made sure the mission went forward anyway because one of those civilians was Taliban leadership, and this was the Cold War, and the enemy of my enemy was my friend until we needed them to be our enemy instead. Senator Hale is going to be vice president. He's 2 heartbeats from the Oval Office. Can't have his past catching up with him. Can't have witnesses who remember when he was Marcus Hale, CIA case officer, signing off on war crimes. So you've been killing everyone who knew, making it look like accidents. For 3 years, yes. Very successfully, I might add. You were supposed to die in that cabin. Your friend Martinez was next. Michael Reeves's daughter after that. Clean sweep, fresh start. Everyone wins except the people who are already dead. Thomas looked at Martinez, looked at the 6 men with rifles, looked at the darkness where he knew Ava was positioned with a scope and a rifle and orders to hold fire that he knew she'd violate the second things went sideways. What about Natasha? Webb laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Natasha Volkov is my employee, has been for 2 years. I didn't hire her to kill Kingfisher witnesses. I hired her to find them. She's very good at finding people who don't want to be found. The killing part, well, that was always going to be my team's job. She just thought she was doing it herself. She's going to be very unhappy when she finds out you lied to her. She's going to be very dead when she realizes she's outlived her usefulness, which should be right about. The night exploded. Muzzle flashed from the north ridge, the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle. One of Webb's men dropped, headshot, dead before his brain could process the bullet. Then another shot, another man down. Natasha wasn't holding back, wasn't waiting, was doing exactly what 40 years of training had taught her to do when she realized she'd been betrayed. Webb's team scattered, professional training overriding surprise. They returned fire toward the muzzle flash, suppressive bursts that lit up the night in strobing chaos. Martinez used the distraction to throw himself sideways out of his wheelchair, rolled toward the edge of the dam, pulled a pistol from somewhere Thomas couldn't see because Martinez had always been better at hiding weapons than anyone had a right to be. Thomas ran, not away, toward Martinez, toward the guns, toward the only play that made sense when the plan had dissolved into chaos. He hit the concrete sliding, grabbed Martinez under the arms, dragged him toward the minimal cover of a maintenance shed that probably wouldn't stop rifle rounds, but was better than standing in the open waiting to die. Ava's voice crackled in his ear. He'd forgotten he was wearing the comm unit, forgot in the chaos and the violence and the way time compressed when people were shooting. Thomas, I've got the shot. Webb is exposed. Orders? Negative. Stay hidden. Natasha's doing our work for us. Another shot from the ridge. Another of Webb's men staggered, clutched his throat, went down gurgling. 3 left standing, plus Webb. The math was getting better, but the situation was deteriorating fast. Webb was screaming into his radio. Air support, now! Light up that ridge! Thomas heard it before he saw it. The distinctive thump of helicopter rotors. Military, probably Black Hawk. Probably equipped with thermal imaging and door guns and the capacity to turn the ridge into a moonscape. Natasha was good, but she wasn't bulletproof. The helicopter came in fast from the south, searchlight painting the landscape in harsh white. The ridge where Natasha had positioned lit up like noon. Thomas saw her, just for a second, a figure in winter camouflage breaking cover, running for a vehicle parked 200 meters back. Saw the door gunner tracking her. Saw the muzzle flash. Saw Ava's shot, 1,400 meters, uphill. At night, with wind gusting across the dam strong enough to knock a bullet off course by feet. Ava took the shot anyway. Took it because the door gunner was going to kill Natasha, and Natasha was the only person in this equation who wasn't CIA, wasn't a contractor, wasn't working for the people who'd killed Ava's father. The bullet hit the helicopter's tail rotor. Didn't destroy it, didn't have to, just damaged it enough that the pilot had to abort, had to pull up and bank away before the whole aircraft came apart in the air. The helicopter limped east, searchlight dying, and Natasha disappeared into the Badlands like she'd never been there at all. Webb spun, trying to track the shot, trying to figure out where it had come from. His remaining men were doing the same, rifles up, thermal scopes scanning. "She's not alone," Webb said into his radio. "Multiple shooters, light up the entire area." Martinez was laughing, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, lying on cold concrete, surrounded by people who wanted him dead, and the old Marine was laughing like this was the best night of his life. "Told you she was good," he said to Thomas. "Told you Michael's daughter had the gift. She just painted a target on herself. She just saved a life. That's what Marines do. We save people even when people don't deserve saving." Webb was walking toward them now, rifle up, professional, calm. The kind of calm that came from having killed enough people that it stopped being emotional and became purely mechanical. "Last chance, Brennan. Tell me where the other shooter is. Tell me how many people you brought. Tell me everything, and I'll make this quick." Thomas looked up at the man who'd been killing at his friends for 3 years, looked at the rifle pointed at his face, looked at Martinez beside him, still grinning like a madman. "You want to know how many people I brought? Yes, not enough to stop you, but enough to make sure your boss goes down, enough to make sure every file, every recording, every piece of evidence Michael Reeves collected gets uploaded to every journalist, every congressman, every person with the power to make Senator Hale's life a living hell." Webb's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot came from behind him. Close range, pistol, not a rifle. The kind of shot that said someone had gotten very close without being detected. Webb's head snapped forward. He took 2 steps, confused, not understanding why his legs weren't working. Then he fell. Behind him, Natasha Volkov stood with a smoking pistol and an expression that could have frozen fire. She was smaller than Thomas had imagined. Older. The kind of weather that came from a hard life lived in hard places. But her eyes were young, burning with the kind of rage that 40 years hadn't dimmed. "You don't get to kill him," she said, looking at Webb's body. "I do." She turned the pistol toward Thomas. Martinez moved faster than an 80-year-old man should move, faster than physics should allow. He threw himself between Thomas and the gun, and the bullet that was meant for Thomas's head hit Martinez in the chest. Time stopped. Thomas caught Martinez as he fell, felt the weight, felt the blood, felt the way his old friend's breathing was already going shallow and rapid and wrong. Ray, no, stay with me." Martinez coughed, blood on his lips, blood spreading across his shirt. Through and through, Thomas's mind cataloged automatically. Missed the heart but got the lung. Pneumothorax. Maybe 10 minutes without medical intervention. Maybe less. "Got you to Montana," Martinez whispered. "Finish the mission." "The mission's not over. You don't get to quit. Been quitting for 15 years. Ever since Kandahar took my legs. This is just finishing what got started." Martinez's hand found Thomas's, gripped with surprising strength. Michael would be proud, his girl. She's something special. "Ray, please, tell her. Tell Ava. Her father was a hero. Tried to stop this. Died trying. Make sure she knows. You tell her. You're going to make it." Martinez's smile was sad, knowing. The smile of a man who'd seen enough death to recognize it when it came calling. "Been a hell of a ride, brother. Quesan to hear. 60 years of bad decisions and worse odds. But I'd do it all again, every bit. Because I got to serve with men like you, like Michael. Got to be part of something that mattered." "You mattered, you matter." "Yeah, I did, and now I get to rest. Finally. No more pain, no more wheelchairs, no more wondering if the next morning's going to be the morning that I can't get out of bed." His eyes found Thomas's, clear despite the dying. "You take care of yourself. Stop drinking, stop running. Stand and fight for once in your miserable life." "I am fighting, right here, right now." "Good. Then win, because I didn't die so you could lose." Martinez's hand went slack. His eyes were still open, but they weren't seeing anymore. Weren't looking at Montana or the dam or Thomas. Were looking at whatever came after. Whatever waited for old Marines who'd given everything and died for people who'd mostly forget them by morning. Thomas felt something break inside. Something that had been holding together for 58 years with nothing but stubbornness and spite. He laid Martinez down gently, closed his eyes, took the pistol from his still warm hand. When Thomas stood and turned to face Natasha, He was holding the gun with the kind of steadiness that surprised him, the kind that came from having nothing left to lose. "Your turn," he said. Natasha hadn't moved. The pistol in her hand was steady too. Two shooters, 4 meters apart, both with clear shots, both with nothing between them except 4 decades of grievance and grief. "He saved you," Natasha said. "We have. Because that's what Marines do. They save each other, even when it costs everything. I've spent 40 years learning to kill, learning to be precise, learning to make men like you suffer. And now I find out I've been working for the people who used you, who used my father, who used all of us." Webb was lying about employing you, about everything. No, he was telling the truth. "I took his money. I found the targets. I thought I was hunting the men who killed my father. Turns out I was helping the men who ordered his death clean up their mess." She lowered the pistol slightly. Not much, just enough that Thomas understood she was thinking instead of just reacting. "Your friend, the old one, he died for you. He was my brother. I killed my brothers. 7 of them. Men who served with my father. Men who were just following orders, like you were just following orders. Men who deserved better than a bullet from a ghost they'd never wronged." "What do you want, Natasha?" "I want my father back. I want to be 12 again. I want the bullet to miss. I want every want that's impossible." She raised the pistol again, centered it on Thomas's chest. "But since I can't have any of that, I'll settle for what I can get. You dead, justice, closure, whatever word makes it sound like something other than revenge. Will it help, killing me? I don't know, but I've spent 40 years believing it would. Can't stop now. Too much invested, too many bodies, too much hate to just walk away and pretend it was all for nothing." Thomas felt the weight of Martinez's pistol in his hand, felt the trigger under his finger, felt the choice crystallizing into a single moment that would define whatever happened next. He could shoot, probably take her with him, trade deaths and call it even. Or he could lower the gun, take the bullet, give Natasha what she thought she wanted, and hope it was enough to end the cycle. Ava's voice in his ear made the decision for him. "Thomas, I've got the shot. She's centered, wind's calm, range is manageable. Say the word." Thomas looked at Natasha, saw the 12-year-old girl she'd been, saw the weapon she'd become, saw himself reflected in her eyes, a killer who'd spent decades trying to justify the unjustifiable. "Ava, no, stand down. She killed Martinez. Martinez died protecting me. That's on me. This whole thing is on me. I pulled the trigger 40 years ago. I'm not asking you to pull one now. Thomas, she will kill you. Maybe. Maybe I deserve it. Either way, you don't get this on your conscience. You don't get to become what I am, what she is. You get to be better, like your father wanted." Silence on the comm, then Ava's voice, tight with emotion but controlled. "Copy, holding fire, but if she shoots you, all bets are off." Thomas lowered Martinez's pistol, held it by the barrel, extended it toward Natasha like an offering. "Here, make it clean. Make it quick. But know that killing me doesn't change what happened, doesn't bring your father back, doesn't undo 40 years of pain. It just adds one more body to a pile that's already too high." Natasha stared at him. The pistol wavered. Not much, just enough that Thomas knew she was human under all the training and trauma. "You're not going to fight? I've been fighting for 50 years. I'm tired. If you need me dead to find peace, take the shot. I'm done running." "That's it? That's your plan? Surrender and hope I have mercy?" "I'm hoping you have wisdom. Wisdom to know that revenge is just pain in a different direction. That killing me makes you feel better for maybe an hour before you realize nothing's changed, except now you're a murderer of an unarmed man and I'm dead, and neither of us is any closer to fixing what's broken." Natasha's hand was shaking now. The pistol, trembling like an earthquake, was running through her bones. "You don't get to do this. Don't get to make yourself the victim. You killed my father. I did. I killed 17 other people too. I've carried them for 40 years. Every face, every name I could learn. Every night I close my eyes and see them. And you know what I learned?" "What?" "That carrying bodies doesn't make them lighter. It just makes you weaker until you can't carry anything else. Not joy, not love, not hope. Just corpses and guilt and the knowledge that you can't undo what's done." Natasha's pistol lowered, not dropped, just lowered to her side. Her face was wet, tears cutting tracks through the grime and the decades of accumulated armor. "I don't know how to stop," she whispered. "Neither did I. Still don't most days. But maybe we start by not adding to it. Maybe we start by choosing differently than we were taught. Movement in the darkness. Ava approaching. Rifle lowered but ready. She'd abandoned her hide position. Probably against every tactical principle Martinez had taught her. Probably the right call anyway, because some situations required presence more than they required positioning. She stopped 10 feet away, looked at Natasha, looked at Thomas, looked at Martinez's body on the cold concrete. He was a good man, Ava said quietly. Better than most. He died saving someone who probably didn't deserve saving. That's the kind of man he was. I killed him, Natasha said. You pulled the trigger. But the people who set this in motion, the people who lied to you, who used you, who turned a 12-year-old girl into a weapon, they killed him. They killed my father. They killed everyone we've lost. The question is what we do about it. What can we do? They're senators, contractors, protected by systems designed to protect them. Ava pulled out a phone, not hers, the encrypted one from Martinez's gear. She held it up so both Thomas and Natasha could see the screen. While you were all busy shooting each other, I uploaded everything. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence my father collected. Sent it to every journalist, every oversight committee, every person with the power to make noise. By morning, Senator Hale's name is going to be radioactive. By afternoon, investigations will start. By next week, careers will end. That won't bring anyone back, Natasha said. No, but it'll mean they didn't die for nothing. It'll mean the truth comes out. It'll mean the people responsible face consequences. Maybe not enough consequences, maybe not justice, but something, which is more than we had an hour ago. Natasha looked at the pistol in her hand, looked at Thomas, looked at Ava, looked at the choice crystallized in front of her. I spent 40 years preparing to kill him, trained for it, dreamed about it, built my entire life around it. And now you're telling me to just walk away? I'm telling you that revenge is a fire that burns everything, including the person who lights it, Ava said. I'm telling you that my father tried to stop this, that Ray Martinez died trying to stop this, that Thomas has been trying to stop this in his own broken way for decades. I'm telling you that you get to choose who you are next, the weapon they made you, or the person you might have been if the world had been kinder. The silence stretched, wind across the dam, water against concrete, the sound of choices being weighed on scales that would determine who lived and who died and who got to walk away. Natasha dropped the pistol. It clattered on concrete, loud in the silence. Final. I want them to pay, all of them, everyone who did this, everyone who covered it up, everyone who profited. They will, Ava said, or they'll die trying to hide it. Either way, the truth is out. The rest is just details. Natasha looked at Thomas one last time. You don't get forgiveness. Not from me. Not ever. I don't deserve it. No, you don't. But you get to live with that. Get to wake up every morning knowing what you did, knowing what it became, knowing that the best thing you can do is try to be better than you were. Try to earn redemption you'll never actually achieve. She turned and walked away, into the darkness, into the Badlands, into whatever came next for someone who'd spent a lifetime preparing for a moment that never came. Thomas watched her go, felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, not exactly. Just the absence of tension that had been there so long he'd forgotten what it felt like without it. Ava knelt beside Martinez, put her hand on his chest, closed her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, for carrying my father's letter, for training me, for dying so someone else could live. Thank you. Thomas knelt beside her, two soldiers mourning a third, the mathematics of war, the arithmetic of loss. He was right, Thomas said. Your father would be proud. You're everything he hoped you'd be. I'm angry. I'm scared. I'm standing over a body on a dam in Montana and I don't know what happens next. That makes you human. The rest is just trying to do right with the time we have left. They sat with the Martinez until the police came, until the federal agents came, until the machinery of investigation and bureaucracy and official response ground into motion. They answered questions, gave statements, told as much of the truth as they could without compromising what needed to stay hidden. Senator Richard Hale was arrested 3 days later, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and a dozen other crimes that came with sentences measured in decades. His political career ended in a courtroom in Washington while cameras watched and former allies pretended they'd never known him. Marcus Webb's body was found on the dam by morning. His team scattered. Some were caught. Some disappeared into the network of contractors and mercenaries that existed in the gray spaces between official and unofficial war. The CIA disavowed knowledge. The contractors claimed client privilege. Nobody talked. Everyone walked except the ones who couldn't. Natasha Volkov vanished. Interpol said she was in Argentina. FBI said she was in Southeast Asia. CIA said she was dead and provided a body that turned out to be someone else entirely. Thomas figured she'd earned the right to disappear, earned the right to build something new from the ashes of what had been. 2 weeks later, Thomas stood at Ray Martinez's funeral in Wyoming, full military honors, flag-draped coffin, 3 volleys and taps played by a young Marine who looked like he was trying not to cry. The governor attended, the senator spoke. Everyone said the right words about service and sacrifice and the price of freedom. Thomas said nothing, just stood in the back and remembered a kid from El Paso who'd pulled him out of a burning building in Kabul. Remembered 60 years of friendship. Remembered the grin Martinez had worn even while dying because at the end, he'd finished the mission, and that was all that mattered to an old Marine. Ava stood beside him, not speaking, just present. They'd become something like family in the weeks since Montana. Not father and daughter. That ship had sailed, but something, connected by violence and loss and the understanding that came from having survived things that should have killed them. After the funeral, after the reception, after the handshakes and the condolences and the performance of public grief, Thomas drove back to Montana, to the ruins of his cabin, to the emptiness that had been his sanctuary. Ava came with him. They spent 3 days clearing the wreckage, salvaging what could be salvaged, saying goodbye to what couldn't. On the 4th day, Ava asked the question Thomas had been waiting for. What now? I don't know. I've spent 50 years running from things. Might be time to figure out what I'm running toward. My father's letter, the last page. He said you were the best man he knew. Said if anything happened to him, I should trust you. Even though you were broken, even though you were a drunk, even though you'd probably let me down. He said you were worth trusting anyway. Your father was an optimist. My father was right about most things. She looked at the ruins of the cabin. Help me rebuild it. Not this cabin. Something better. Something that matters. Use whatever time we have left to do something other than die slowly. Thomas looked at her. Saw Michael in her eyes. Saw Martinez's stubbornness in her jaw. Saw something that might be hope if hope hadn't seemed like such a foreign concept. Yeah, okay, let's build something. They started the next day. Clearing land, pouring foundation, building not a cabin but something larger. A space that could be used, could help, could matter. 6 months later, the Montana Veterans Resource Center opened its doors. Free counseling for vets, job placement services, a place to sleep for those who had nowhere else to go, funded by the money Thomas had saved over decades of CIA paychecks he'd never spent, staffed by volunteers who understood what it meant to come home from war and find home didn't exist anymore. Ava ran it. Thomas helped. They didn't save everyone, didn't fix everything, but they saved some, fixed enough, made a difference in the small ways that added up over time. On the 1-year anniversary of Martinez's death, Thomas stood at a memorial they'd built on the property. Stone marker, bronze plaque, Martinez's name and dates and the only words that mattered. He died so others could live. He lived so others could hope. Thomas placed flowers at the base, stood in silence, felt the Montana wind that smelled like snow and pine and the particular emptiness of high country. A car pulled up. Thomas turned, watched a woman get out, small, weathered, moving with the careful grace of someone who'd learned violence and chosen to walk away from it. Natasha Volkov looked older than she had on the dam, softer. She wore civilian clothes and carried nothing that suggested the weapons she'd been trained to use. I heard about this place, she said, heard what you were building. It's not much. It's more than I ever built, more than most people build. She looked at the memorial. He was the one who died protecting you. Yeah, and the girl, she's your partner now. She's my hope now, that's different. Natasha was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, extended it toward Thomas. A photograph. Old, faded. A man in Soviet military uniform with a young girl on his shoulders. Both smiling, both alive, both from a time before bullets and betrayal. My father. Me. Before. She looked at the image. I carried this for 40 years. Thought it would remind me why I was hunting you, why revenge mattered. But all it did was remind me of what I'd lost, what I'd never get back no matter how many people I killed. What are you going to do with it now? I thought I'd leave it here, with your friend. Let the ghosts rest together. Let the past be past instead of a weight we carry until it crushes us. She placed the photograph at the base of the memorial, stepped back, looked at Thomas with eyes that were no longer burning. I don't forgive you. I told you that. But I don't need to kill you anymore. That's something. It's everything, Thomas said. Maybe. Or maybe it's just the beginning of figuring out who I am when I'm not defined by hate. She turned toward her car, stopped. Your girl, the Marine, tell her thank you for not shooting me, for choosing mercy when I wouldn't have. Tell her yourself, she's inside. Natasha smiled. It looked unpracticed, uncertain, like a skill she'd forgotten and was relearning. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll come back sometime. See what you've built. See if there's room for one more ghost trying to figure out how to be human again. Doors always open. She drove away. Thomas watched until the car disappeared into the distance, watched until there was nothing left but dust and the kind of silence that felt less like absence and more like possibility. Ava came out of the building, stood beside him. Was that her? Yeah. Is she coming back? I don't know. Maybe. If she does, we'll deal with it. And if she doesn't, then she found peace somewhere else. Either way, it's her choice, not ours. They stood together in the Montana afternoon, father figure and surrogate daughter, broken pieces that had found a way to fit together. Not perfectly, but enough. The wind carried the smell of pine and snow, carried the promise of winter, carried the weight of all the things they'd lost and the possibility of all the things they might still build. Thomas closed his eyes and saw the faces. Khe-Sanh, Afghanistan, all the people he'd killed in the name of orders he'd stopped questioning until it was too late. Saw Michael, saw Martinez, saw the 12-year-old girl who'd become a killer because he'd pulled a trigger 40 years ago. But he also saw this, the center, the work, the people they were helping, the possibility that damage could be repaired, that sins could be atoned for, that the last precision in a life of violence could be choosing mercy instead of vengeance. It wasn't redemption, wasn't forgiveness, wasn't anything except the daily choice to be slightly better than he'd been the day before. But it was enough. It had to be enough, because it was all he had left. The courtroom in Washington smelled like old wood and older lies. Thomas Brennan sat in the gallery and watched Senator Richard Hale's world collapse in real time. The prosecution had been methodical, surgical. Every piece of evidence Michael Reeves had died collecting, every recording Martinez had preserved, every file that proved Kingfisher wasn't just an operation, but a conspiracy that had murdered 17 civilians and covered it up for 40 years. Hale's lawyers were expensive, $300 an hour expensive, the kind that knew how to delay and deflect and deploy every procedural trick in the federal rulebook. But they couldn't stop the tide, couldn't argue against audio recordings of Hale ordering hits on whistleblowers, couldn't explain away bank transfers to offshore accounts. Couldn't make a jury forget that this man, who'd been 2 heartbeats from the Oval Office, had built his career on the corpses of people who'd trusted American promises. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon in late spring. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder. Obstruction of justice. Accessory after the fact. The judge read each count in a voice that carried the weight of federal authority and the satisfaction of someone who'd seen too many powerful men walk free and was tired of it. Hale's face never changed, didn't crack, didn't show anything except the kind of contempt that came from believing he was too important to face consequences. He looked at the jury like they were insects, looked at the judge like she was an obstacle, looked at Thomas in the gallery like he was a problem that could still be solved with the right application of violence and money. The bailiff led Hale away in handcuffs, federal custody pending sentencing, maximum security because senators, even disgraced ones, needed protection from the general population in prison. Thomas watched him go and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just the emptiness that came from winning a fight that had cost more than victory was worth. Ava met him outside the courthouse. She'd flown in from Montana for the verdict, taken leave from the Veterans Center, dressed in civilian clothes but still moving like a Marine, all purpose and controlled energy. It's done, she said. The trial's done. Hale still breathing means it's not done. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. He's 64 years old. Even with good behavior, he'll die behind bars. Prisons where men like Hale make friends, where they plan, where they use connections built over 40 years to make sure loose ends get tied up. You think he'll come after us? I think men like Hale don't accept loss. They reframe it as temporary setback and start planning the comeback. They walk through Washington in the afternoon sun. The city looked the same as it always had. Marble monuments to dead ideals. Limestone buildings full of living corruption. Tourists taking pictures of history they didn't understand. Interns hurrying between offices carrying briefcases full of ambition and paperwork. Thomas had spent 6 years in this city, working out of Langley, pushing paper and attending meetings, and slowly drinking himself to death in an apartment in Arlington. He'd hated every minute of it, hated the politics, hated the way violence got sanitized into policy positions, hated most of all the way everyone pretended they were the good guys when the bodies kept piling up in countries most Americans couldn't find on a map. You staying for sentencing? Ava asked. No, I've seen enough. Whatever number the judge gives him, it won't bring Michael back, won't bring Martinez back, won't undo 40 years of damage. So we just go home, go back to Montana and pretend none of this happened? We go back and build. That's all we can do. Build something that matters more than revenge. Build something that helps instead of hurts. They were walking past the Lincoln Memorial when Thomas's phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code was local. Washington, D.C. He almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail. But something about the timing felt wrong, felt intentional. Brennan. The voice on the other end was female, professional. The kind of neutral tone that came from government training in how to deliver bad news without emotion. Colonel Brennan, this is Deputy Director Sarah Chen, FBI. We need to talk, in person, now. About what? About the fact that Senator Hale posted bail 2 hours ago. Thomas stopped walking, felt ice settle in his stomach. He was denied bail, judge's order, maximum security custody. Appeals court overturned it. National security concerns. Hale's lawyers argued he has information vital to ongoing intelligence operations. Argued that holding him violated his rights as a cooperating witness. That's insane. He's a convicted felon. He's a convicted felon with 40 years of classified knowledge and friends in very high places. The appeals court agreed to house arrest with monitoring, electronic bracelet, federal supervision. He's currently at his estate in Virginia. You're telling me he's free. I'm telling you he's out of custody pending sentencing. And I'm telling you that 3 hours ago, 6 men with military backgrounds checked into hotels within a 10-mile radius of his estate, all paying cash, all using aliases that don't quite hold up to scrutiny. Thomas felt his training kick in, felt the old instincts that had kept him alive in a dozen war zones. He's assembling a team. That would be my assessment, which is why I'm calling you instead of pretending this is a coincidence. You're a target, Colonel. So is Captain Brennan. So is anyone connected to the Kingfisher revelations. You offering protection? I'm offering a warning. FB, I can't provide security for every witness in every trial. We don't have the resources or the legal authority. What I can do is tell you that a very dangerous man just got released on a technicality and he has the means and motivation to clean up loose ends before sentencing. When sentencing? 6 weeks, plenty of time for someone with Hale's resources to make problems disappear. The line went dead. Thomas stood on the National Mall and felt the weight of the world pressing down. 40 years of violence, 40 years of running. And now, when he thought it was finally over, the past was reaching out one more time to drag him back into darkness. Ava had heard enough of the conversation to understand. What do? We don't do anything. You get on a plane back to Montana. You disappear. Change your name again if you have to. I'll handle Hale. No, Ava, this isn't negotiable. You're right, it's not. Because I'm not running while you play hero. We're in this together. We finish it together. Your father would want you safe. My father would want justice, real justice. Not the kind that gets overturned by corrupt judges and appeals court technicalities. She looked at Thomas with eyes that were Michael's eyes, hard and clear and uncompromising. We took down Hale once. We can do it again, but this time we do it permanent. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about survival, about making sure the people who killed my father don't get to walk away because they know the right lawyers. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that wasn't who they were, that wasn't what Martinez died for, that wasn't the legacy they were building in Montana. But looking at her face, seeing the steel in her spine, he recognized something he'd seen in mirrors for 50 years. The look of someone who'd decided the rules didn't apply anymore. The look that preceded the kind of violence that couldn't be taken back. No, he said firmly, we do this the right way. We find evidence the appeals court can't ignore. We make sure Hale goes back behind bars legally. And while we're gathering evidence, he's gathering a kill team. You heard the FBI, 6 military contractors. How long before they find us? How long before we're the ones in body bags while Hale plays golf at his estate? I've been hunted before. I know how to disappear. And I've been hunting before. I know how people think when they're running scared. They make mistakes. They get desperate. They die. Ava grabbed his arm. Thomas, listen to me. I've spent 3 years in war zones. I've called in airstrikes. I've made decisions that killed people. This isn't different. It's just closer to home. It's completely different. Those were enemy combatants in active war zones. This is a United States senator under house arrest in Virginia. This is a war criminal who's murdered American citizens and is planning to murder more. Geography doesn't change what he is. They stood on the mall in the shadow of monuments built to honor men who'd made hard choices. Washington, Lincoln, the anonymous soldiers of a dozen wars who died believing their sacrifice meant something. Thomas wondered what they'd think of this conversation. This argument about whether the ends justified the means, whether justice delayed was justice denied, whether killing a killer made you a killer too. His phone rang again. Different number. This one he recognized. Montana area code. The Veterans Center. This is Brennan. The voice was young, male. One of the volunteers who helped run the center. Kid named Danny who'd done 2 tours in Iraq and come home with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares that wouldn't quit. Mr. Brennan, we've got a situation. 3 men just showed up, said they were reporters, wanted to interview you about the Hale trial, but they're not reporters. I did 6 years infantry. I know operators when I see them. Where are they now? I told them you were in D.C. They left. But Mr. Brennan, they were casing the place, taking pictures, asking about security, about who works here, about you and Captain Ava. Danny paused. These guys aren't media. They're scouts. They're coming back. Danny, listen carefully. Close the center. Get everyone out. Tell them it's a gas leak. Tell them anything, but get them clear. Then you leave too. Don't go home. Don't go anywhere predictable. Just disappear for a few days. What about the center? It's just a building. Buildings can be replaced. People can't. Thomas ended the call, looked at Ava, saw his own thoughts reflected in her face. He sent them after the center, Ava said quietly. After the one good thing we've built. The one thing that actually helps people. He's sending a message. He can reach us anywhere. Can hurt what we care about. Can take everything we've built and burn it down. Then we send a message back. Thomas felt something shift inside him. Felt the last resistance crumble. Felt himself becoming again the person he'd been before Montana, before sobriety, before the desperate attempt to build something that mattered more than killing. Yeah, he said, we send a message, but we do it smart. We do it clean. And we make sure when it's over, Hale doesn't get to be a martyr. He gets to be a footnote, a cautionary tale, a name people forget. They took a cab to a hotel in Arlington, paid cash, used fake names, the kind of tradecraft that came back like riding a bicycle. The room was generic, 2 beds, bad art on the walls, a view of a parking lot, perfect. Thomas spread a map of Virginia on the desk, marked Hale's estate from memory. He'd been there once, years ago, back when Hale was still pretending to be a public servant instead of a war criminal. 10 acres in Fairfax County, gated, security cameras, private security even before the trial. Now, with house arrest and federal monitoring, it would be a fortress. 6 contractors, Ava said, studying the map, plus whatever private security he already had, plus federal monitoring. We'd be outnumbered and outgunned. We're always outnumbered and outgunned. That's why we don't fight fair. What's the play? Thomas thought about it. Thought about 40 years of operations in places where being smart mattered more than being strong. Thought about every lesson learned in blood and failure. Thought about what Martinez would do, what Michael would do, what men who died trying to stop this would want him to do. Hale's a narcissist. He thinks he's untouchable. That's his weakness. We use it. How? We make him think he's won. Make him think we're running scared. Make him comfortable enough that he makes a mistake. Over the next 6 hours, they planned. Thomas made calls to people he hadn't spoken to in years. Old CIA contacts who owed him favors. contractors who worked in the gray spaces where legal and illegal blurred, information brokers who sold secrets to whoever paid the most. He spent money he'd saved for 30 years, called in debts he'd accumulated over 4 decades of operations. By midnight, they had the layout of Hale's estate, security schedules, camera placements, patrol routes, electronic monitoring protocols. Everything they needed except a way in that didn't end with them dead or arrested. Federal ankle monitor, Ava said, pointing to the technical specs they'd acquired. GPS tracking, tamper alerts. If he leaves the property or tries to remove it, FBI gets notified immediately. So we don't need him to leave. We need to get to him inside. Through security, through cameras, through federal monitoring. Impossible. Nothing's impossible, just expensive. Thomas pulled up a contact on his phone, name listed as Cypher. No other identifier. I know someone who can help, but you're not going to pay the price. The meeting happened in a Denny's off I-95 at 2 in the morning. The kind of place where the coffee was bad and the questions were worse. Thomas and Ava sat in a back booth, waited, watched the door. She came in at 02:15. Small, Ian, late 30s, dressed like a grad student but moving like someone who knew how to disappear. She slid into the booth across from them without asking permission. Brennan, it's been a while. Sarah, thanks for coming. Don't thank me yet. What you're asking for is treason. Capital T, the kind that gets people disappeared into black sites. What I'm asking for is access to federal monitoring systems. Temporarily. Just long enough to create a window. Sarah Chen, not the FBI deputy director. Different Sarah Chen. This one was a hacker, best Thomas had ever met. She'd worked for NSA until she discovered they were using her code to spy on Americans. She'd objected. They tried to prosecute her. She'd vanished instead. Been living off the grid for 8 years, selling her skills to anyone who could afford her rates. You want me to hack federal house arrest monitoring, give you access to Senator Hale's location without triggering alarms. Do I have that right? Yes. And in exchange? $200,000, cash, plus a clean passport, plus extraction to anywhere you want to go. Sarah drummed her fingers on the table, calculating, weighing risk against reward. Finally nodded. You're planning to kill him. I'm planning to have a conversation. What happens during that conversation depends on him. Bullshit. You're going to kill him because the legal system failed and you're out of options. I'm not judging. I'm just making sure I understand what I'm facilitating. Does it matter? To my price, yes. Murder costs more than burglary. $300,000, plus the passport, plus you never contact me again after this. Thomas looked at Ava. She nodded. He looked back at Sarah. Deal. Sarah pulled out a laptop, booted it up, started typing code that looked like a foreign language. I'll need 12 hours to map the security, 24 to build the back door, 48 to test without triggering alerts. Call it 3 days total. We don't have 3 days. Then you don't have access. This isn't McDonald's. I can't just hand you what you want on demand. Federal systems have redundancies and fail-safes. I need time to work around them. Hale's contractors are already moving, already scouting targets. Every day we wait is a day they get closer. Sarah stopped typing, looked at Thomas with eyes that had seen too much government corruption to be surprised by more. Then I suggest you find a way to slow them down, because rushing this gets us all caught or killed. Probably both. She packed up her laptop, left a burner phone on the table. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Until then, stay alive. She walked out into the night. Thomas and Ava sat in the Denny's booth and drank bad coffee and tried to figure out how to buy 3 days they didn't have. The answer came from an unexpected source. Thomas's phone rang at 0400. He'd been half asleep in the hotel room. Came awake instantly. Old habits. Brennan, Colonel, we need to talk. The voice was familiar. Female, Russian accent, Natasha Volkov. Thomas sat up, put the phone on speaker so Ava could hear. Natasha, didn't expect to hear from you. I didn't expect a call, but I've been watching the news. Saw Hale got released. Saw your veteran center got visitors who weren't veterans. Put pieces together. Figured you could use help. Why would you help us? Because Hale was one of the people who used me, who lied to me, who turned my father's death into leverage for his political career. Because I spent 40 years hunting the wrong people, while men like him sat in Washington and collected paychecks. She paused. Because you let me walk away. Could have killed me. Could have turned me in. You chose mercy. Now I'm choosing to repay the debt. What are you offering? 6 contractors, all former military, all currently working for Hale. I know where they're staging, I know their schedule, I know their capabilities. Give me targets and I'll make them disappear. Give you the time you need. Natasha, if you do this, you're committing crimes on American soil. FBI will hunt you. FBI's been hunting me for 30 years. I'm still here. They're still looking. Ava leaned toward the phone. Can you take all 6? Captain Brennan, your father trained good soldiers. You're proof. Natasha's voice softened slightly. Yes, I can take all 6, but understand, I'm not doing this clean. These men are planning to kill you. Kill Thomas. Burn down everything you've built. I won't lose sleep over stopping them permanently. Neither will I, Ava said. Thomas wanted to object, wanted to say this wasn't justice, wasn't right, wasn't what they'd built the center to represent. But he looked at Ava's face and saw the same calculation he'd made 1,000 times in a dozen wars. Sometimes survival meant getting dirty. Sometimes the choice wasn't between right and wrong, but between bad and worse. How long do you need? Thomas asked. Give me 48 hours. By then, either all 6 are neutralized or I'm dead. Either way, you'll know. Natasha, wait, you don't owe us this. I don't do this for debt. I do this because I'm tired of men like Hale destroying lives and calling it policy. I'm tired of being the weapon they aim at innocence. For once, I'd like to aim myself at someone who deserves it. The line went dead. Ava looked at Thomas. You trust her? I trust that she hates Hale more than she hates me. I trust that 40 years of training makes her very good at killing people. Beyond that, I don't know. It's enough. We work the problem. We plan for her success and we plan for her failure. 3 days from now, we move on Hale regardless. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Thomas acquired weapons from contacts who didn't ask questions. Ava studied the estate layout until she could navigate it blindfolded. They ran scenarios, planned contingencies, tried to account for every variable in an equation that had too many unknowns. News started filtering in on the second day. A contractor found dead in his hotel room. Apparent heart attack. Another found in his car. Carbon monoxide poisoning. A third disappeared entirely. Walked out of a bar and never came back. By the end of 48 hours, all 6 of Hale's contractors were dead or missing. Natasha called on schedule. Package delivered? Your window's clear. How many? All 6. 3 look like accidents. 3 look like they never existed. FBI will investigate eventually, but they won't find anything useful. She paused. Good hunting, Colonel. Make it count. Sarah Chen's burner phone buzzed 12 hours later. Text message with an attachment. Access codes. Backdoor into the federal monitoring system. Instructions on how to create a 3-hour window where Hale's ankle monitor would appear functional while actually being offline. Thomas read the instructions twice, memorized them, deleted the message. Tomorrow night, he said to Ava, we have 3 hours, in and out, clean. And if it's not clean, then we make sure Hale doesn't walk away to try again. They drove to Virginia in a rental car paid for with cash. Approached Hale's estate from the west, where the security was thinnest. Parked half a mile out and walked through forest that bordered the property. Thomas moved like a ghost. Ava moved like a Marine. Together they covered ground that should have taken 30 minutes and 15. The estate loomed ahead, lights blazing, security cameras sweeping, but the federal ankle monitor was showing Hale safely inside. No alerts, no warnings. Sarah Chen had earned her money. They went over the wall at 2200 hours, avoided the cameras using the blind spots Sarah had identified, crossed the lawn using shadows and patience and 40 years of practice at being invisible. The house was massive, colonial style, white columns, the kind of place that screamed old money and older privilege. Thomas had been inside once, remembered the layout, study on the first floor. That's where Hale would be. That's where men like him always were, surrounded by books they'd never read and awards they didn't deserve. Ava picked the lock on the French doors. Old school, no electronics to hack, just pins and springs and the kind of skill that came from necessity. The door opened silent. They slipped inside. The study was exactly where Thomas remembered. Down the hall. Third door on the left. Light showing under the door. Sound of ice clinking in glass. Hale was drinking, probably celebrating his release, probably planning his next move, probably convinced he'd won. Thomas opened the door. Senator Richard Hale sat behind a desk that was probably worth more than most people's cars. Crystal glass in hand, expensive scotch. He looked up when they entered. Didn't flinch, didn't react, just smiled like he'd been expecting them. Colonel Brennan, Captain Brennan, right on time. Thomas closed the door behind them. Ava moved to cover the windows. Professional, tactical, the kind of movements that came from training and experience. You knew we were coming, Thomas said. I counted on it. You're predictable, Colonel. That's always been your weakness. You follow patterns. Martinez followed patterns too. That's how I knew he'd recorded everything. How I knew he'd preserved evidence. How I knew eventually you'd come for me. Your contractors are dead. I know. I authorized their hiring. I also ensured they were sloppy enough that someone like Natasha Volkov could eliminate them. She did me a favor, removed 6 witnesses who could connect me to conspiracy charges. Thomas felt ice in his veins. This is a trap. This is a demonstration of power, of reach, of the simple fact that men like me don't lose to men like you. We own the system. We built it. We maintain it. And occasionally we use it to crush people who forget their place. Hale pressed a button under his desk. Lights flooded the lawn outside. Armed security emerged from positions Thomas hadn't spotted. At least a dozen, all with rifles. All trained on the French doors they had entered through. Federal monitoring shows I'm safely in my study. Shows my ankle monitor hasn't been tampered with. Shows no unauthorized entry. Meanwhile, you're both here, illegally, armed, threatening a United States senator under house arrest. Hale's smile widened. By morning, you'll be the criminals. I'll be the victim, and the narrative will be whatever I say it is. Ava's hand moved toward her weapon. Thomas stopped her with a gesture. You can't shoot your way out, Hale continued. Too many guards, too much exposure. Best case, you kill me and die in the process. Worst case, you surrender and spend the rest of your lives in federal prison while I walk free after appeals overturn a conviction based on tainted evidence. The evidence wasn't tainted. It will be by the time my lawyers are done. Chain of custody issues, illegal surveillance, fruit of the poisonous tree, every technicality in the book. I'll be free in 6 months. You'll be rotting in cells, and everything you've built, everyone you've helped, it'll all disappear like it never existed. Thomas looked at the man who'd ordered his friends killed, who'd covered up war crimes, who'd spent 40 years climbing over corpses to reach power. Looked at him and felt something cold and final settle into place. You're right, Thomas said. We can't shoot our way out, can't kill you without dying, can't win this game by your rules. He pulled his weapon, placed it on the desk. So we're changing the rules. Hale looked confused. Surrendering? Testifying right now, on video, everything we know, everything we can prove, everything that will make you toxic to every political ally you have left. We might go to prison, but you're coming with us, and unlike you, we don't have anything left to lose. Ava pulled out her phone, started recording, started speaking into the camera with the clear, calm voice of someone giving testimony under oath. My name is Captain Ava Brennan, United States Marine Corps. My father was Michael Reeves, killed in Fallujah in 2004 after investigating war crimes committed by Senator Richard Hale. I am here tonight to provide evidence of conspiracy, murder, and obstruction of justice. She spoke for 3 minutes, named names, cited dates, referenced documents, every word a nail in Hale's coffin. Thomas spoke next, gave his testimony. 40 years of operations, 40 years of following orders, 40 years of watching men like Hale send people to die and call it foreign policy. When they finished, Ava uploaded the video, not to one platform, to dozens, YouTube, Twitter, every social media site that existed, every journalist's email they could find, every congressman, every oversight committee, every person with the power to watch and the responsibility to care. By the time Hale's security broke down the door, the video had been viewed 10,000 times. By the time they were arrested, 100,000. By morning, it would be viral. Senator Richard Hale sat behind his desk and watched his world end in real time. Watched the narrative slip from his control. Watched everything he'd built over 40 years collapse because 2 people had decided truth mattered more than survival. You've killed yourselves, he said quietly. You know that. Maybe, Thomas said as the guards pulled him to his feet, but we're taking you with us, and that's enough. They were separated, taken to different vehicles, driven to federal holding facilities. Thomas didn't see Ava again that night, didn't know if he'd ever see her again. But lying in a cell in Arlington waiting for morning and lawyers and the machinery of justice to grind into motion, Thomas Brennan felt something he hadn't felt in 50 years. Peace, not happiness, not satisfaction, just the simple peace of knowing he'd finally stopped running, finally stood and fought, finally chosen the hard right over the easy wrong. Whatever came next, he'd face it standing up. That was enough. That was everything. The federal holding cell in Arlington smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Thomas Brennan sat on a concrete bench and watched dawn paint the sky through a window so small it might as well have been decorative. 72 hours since the arrest. 3 days of lawyers and federal prosecutors and questions that circled the same basic truth from 100 different angles. Did you illegally enter Senator Hale's property? Yes. Were you armed? Yes. Did you intend to harm a United States senator under house arrest? No comment. The lawyer said no comment was smart. Thomas thought no comment was cowardice. He'd spent 50 years hiding behind classifications, implausible deniability, and the comfortable distance between pulling a trigger and accepting responsibility for where the bullet landed. He was done with no comment, done with lies that sounded better than truth. But the lawyers insisted, and Thomas was tired of fighting battles he couldn't win with weapons he didn't have. Ava was 3 cells down. He could hear her sometimes, doing push-ups, counting cadence under her breath like she was back in boot camp. Maintaining discipline because discipline was all a Marine had when the world stopped making sense. They'd been allowed to see each other once. 15 minutes in a room with guards and lawyers and recording equipment, documenting every word for prosecutors who were trying to decide if they were heroes or criminals or some complicated combination that didn't fit neatly into federal sentencing guidelines. "How you holding up?" Thomas had asked. "I've been in worse places. At least nobody's shooting. Yet. You think Hale will make a move in here?" "I think men like Hale always make a move. Question is when and how and whether we see it coming." The 15 minutes had ended before they could say the things that mattered. Before Thomas could tell her he was sorry for dragging her into this. Before Ava could tell him she'd chosen this herself. Before either of them could acknowledge that maybe, despite everything, they'd done something that mattered. The video had gone viral. 30 million views in 3 days. Every news network running segments. Congressional oversight committees calling emergency sessions. The president himself had been forced to comment, carefully threading the needle between supporting law enforcement and acknowledging that maybe, possibly, there were questions about how Senator Hale had been allowed to post bail. Public opinion was split. Half the country saw Thomas and Ava as vigilantes, criminals who'd taken the law into their own hands. The other half saw them as whistleblowers, patriots who'd exposed corruption when the system failed. Truth was probably somewhere in the middle, but truth had stopped mattering somewhere around the third cable news panel, where people who'd never served a day screamed at each other about honor and duty and sacrifice. Thomas's lawyer was expensive, paid for by a legal defense fund that had raised $2 million in 72 hours, people sending $20, $50, retired veterans sending their disability checks because they believed in something bigger than themselves. The lawyer's name was Rebecca Chen, no relation to Sarah the hacker or the FBI deputy director. Just another person trying to navigate a system that was built to protect power and occasionally accidentally deliver justice. "They're offering a deal," Rebecca said during their 4th meeting. She wore expensive suits and cheap shoes, which Thomas figured meant she spent money on what clients saw and saved on what they didn't. Smart. Practical. The kind of person who understood optics mattered as much as evidence. "What kind of deal?" "Plead guilty to criminal trespass. Suspended sentence. 2 years probation. You and Captain Brennan walk out today. In exchange for? You stop talking. Stop giving interviews. Sign ND. Does that prevent you from discussing Kingfisher, Hale, or any classified operations you participated in? Essentially, you go away quietly and let the adults handle the rest." Thomas laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. The adults, like Senator Hale. Senator Hale is facing his own legal troubles. The video you released has prompted 3 separate federal investigations. His bail has been revoked. He's back in maximum security pending a new trial. Your testimony, while obtained illegally, has opened doors for legitimate prosecution. "So we broke the law so they could enforce it. That about right?" "That's exactly right. Welcome to how the justice system actually works. It's not pretty. It's not fair. But sometimes it gets to the right answer even if it takes the wrong road to get there." "What happens if we don't take the deal?" Rebecca's expression went carefully neutral. The kind of neutral that lawyers used when they were about to deliver bad news. Then you go to trial, face charges of criminal trespass, attempted assault on a federal official, conspiracy, and about 6 other felonies the prosecutor's office has been workshopping. Best case scenario, you're looking at 5 years. Worst case, 20. And that's if the CIA doesn't decide you violated your secrecy agreements and add espionage charges on top. They wouldn't. They absolutely would. You went on camera and discussed classified operations. Doesn't matter that you were exposing crimes. Classification doesn't expire just because the truth is inconvenient. Thomas thought about 5 years in federal prison, thought about 20, thought about dying behind bars because he'd spent 50 years following orders. And the one time he'd decided to think for himself, the system had crushed him for it. What does Ava say? Captain Brennan wants to fight, wants a trial, wants to make Hale and everyone connected to Kingfisher testify under oath in open court. She believes the truth will set you free. Rebecca paused. She's wrong. The truth will get you 20 years and a footnote in history books that call you a traitor. She's her father's daughter. Her father's dead. She doesn't have to be. Thomas looked at his lawyer, saw a woman who was probably good at her job, probably won more cases than she lost, probably went home at night and slept fine because she'd done everything right by the book. Set up a meeting with Ava. Let us talk. Then we'll give you an answer. They met in the same room, same guards, same lawyers. But this time, Rebecca Chen and Ava's lawyer both excused themselves, gave them privacy that probably wasn't legal but was definitely necessary. Ava looked tired, thinner than she'd been a week ago. Federal custody wasn't designed for comfort, but her eyes were clear, focused, the same eyes that had made an impossible shot to save Natasha Volkov's life. They offered you the deal, she asked. Yes, you? Same terms. Plead guilty, shut up, disappear. Let them handle everything from here. You want to fight. I want justice, real justice, not the kind that gets negotiated in back rooms between lawyers who bill by the hour. Justice doesn't exist. Not the way you think, not the way your father thought. It's just power dressed up in robes and presented as something noble. Ava's jaw tightened. Thomas recognized the expression, had seen it on Michael's face 100 times when someone told him the mission was impossible, or the cause was lost, or the fight wasn't worth the cost. My father believed in something. He died believing it. Martinez died believing it. I'm not going to dishonor them by giving up because it's convenient. It's not about convenience. It's about effectiveness. You want to hurt Hale? Accept the deal. Walk free. Keep building the Veterans Center. Help the people you can actually help. That matters more than symbolic gestures in a courtroom. It's not symbolic. It's accountability. It's making sure people like Hale can't hide behind lawyers and technicalities and the assumption that power protects them from consequences. Power does protect them. Always has. Always will. The only question is whether you waste your life proving a point or whether you accept reality and work within it. Ava stood, paced the small room like a caged animal. Marine training said maintain discipline, control emotions, never show weakness. But she was Michael's daughter before she was a Marine, and Michael had never been good at hiding what he felt. You're giving up. I'm being smart. There's a difference. No, you're being a coward. You're doing what you've done for 50 years, running, hiding, taking the easy path and calling it wisdom. She stopped pacing, looked at him with those eyes that were too much like her father's. Martinez didn't die so we could take a plea deal. He died so we could finish the mission, so we could stand up and fight even when the odds were impossible. Martinez died because I made a mistake, because I walked into a trap like an amateur, because I've been making mistakes for so long I've forgotten how to do anything else. That's not true, isn't it? Kaysan, Afghanistan, 40 years of pulling triggers for people who lied to me, 40 years of believing the mission mattered when all that mattered was protecting their careers. I've been wrong about everything, Ava. Why would this be different? She sat down across from him, reached across the table, took his hands in hers. Her grip was strong, calloused from rifle work and hard training, the hands of someone who knew violence but chose when to use it. You weren't wrong about building the center. You weren't wrong about helping veterans who had nowhere else to go. You weren't wrong about standing up to Hale even when it cost you everything. She squeezed his hands. You weren't wrong about me, about believing I could be better than my anger, about teaching me that the shot you don't take matters as much as the one you do. Thomas felt something crack in his chest, felt 50 years of armor fracture, felt tears he hadn't cried since Michael's funeral building behind his eyes. I'm tired, Ava. I'm 58 years old and I'm tired of fighting, tired of losing, tired of watching good people die for causes that don't matter to anyone except the people who profit from them. Then rest, take the deal, walk away. I won't judge you, won't think less of you. You've earned the right to be tired. What about you? I'm going to fight, going to trial, going to make them put Hale on the stand and answer for everything he's done. And if I lose, if I spend the rest of my life in prison, at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll know I didn't surrender just because it was easier. Thomas looked at this woman who wasn't his daughter but felt like it anyway. This warrior who'd inherited her father's courage and her father's stubborn refusal to accept that some battles couldn't be won. Looked at her and saw what he'd been at 26 before the wars and the killing and the slow erosion of everything he'd believed in. Your father would be proud, Thomas said quietly. He'd also tell you that pride's expensive, that martyrdom doesn't change systems, that dying for a cause just means you're dead and the cause goes on without you. Maybe, but he'd fight anyway, because that's who he was, that's who I am, that's who you taught me to be. When you showed me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up even when you know you're going to lose. The guard knocked on the door. Time was up. They had decisions to make, lawyers to inform, deals to accept or refuse. Thomas stood, looked at Ava one last time. I'll take the deal. I'll walk away. I'll rebuild what we started in Montana. But I'm not giving up. I'm just choosing a different battlefield, one where maybe I can win something that matters. I understand. Do you? You're choosing to live instead of die for a symbol. You're choosing to help people who need help instead of fighting people who'll never change. You're choosing wisdom over pride. She smiled. It was hot and knowing and entirely her father's smile. That's not surrender. That's growing up. They called the lawyers back, made their announcements. Thomas accepted the deal. Ava refused. The machinery of justice ground forward in different directions. He would be released within hours. She would remain in custody pending trial. They might not see each other again for years, might never see each other again if the prosecution got everything they wanted. Take care of yourself, Thomas said as they led her back to the cells. You too. And Thomas, build something worth coming home to, because I will come home, even if it takes 20 years. I will come home. He watched her go, watched the door close, watched the last connection to Michael Reeves disappear into the federal detention system. Then he signed the papers his lawyer put in front of him, initialed the NDAs, promised to be silent about things he'd never stop remembering. They released him at 4 in the afternoon, gave him back his personal effects, a wallet with $300 cash, a phone that had 67 missed calls, a set of car keys to a rental that was probably impounded somewhere. Rebecca Chen walked him out, gave him her card, told him to call if he needed anything, told him the legal defense fund still had money left over if he wanted to help pay for Ava's defense, told him he'd made the right choice even though her voice suggested she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Thomas stood on the sidewalk outside the federal building in Arlington and felt the sun on his face for the first time in 72 hours. Felt Virginia humidity. Felt the weight of freedom that came with conditions and compromises. A car pulled up. Black sedan. Government plates. The back window rolled down and Thomas found himself looking at FBI Deputy Director Sarah Chen, the real one, the one who'd warned him about Hale's contractors. Get in, Colonel. We need to talk. Thomas climbed into the back seat because curiosity and caution were battling and curiosity was winning. The car pulled away from the curb, drove through Arlington with the kind of confidence that came from federal authority and the assumption that traffic laws were suggestions. You made quite a mess, Sarah said. Seemed like the thing to do at the time. Senator Hale's lawyers are filing motions, appeals, claiming prosecutorial misconduct, claiming your video constitutes fruit of the poisonous tree. They're good lawyers, expensive, the kind that win. I'm sure they are. But they're not good enough to overcome public pressure. 30 million people watched you testify, watched you lay out 40 years of war crimes, watched you choose prison over silence. That matters. Not in court, maybe, but in the arena of public opinion where senators live or die. Is there a point to this conversation, or are you just providing color commentary? Sarah smiled. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel either, just professional. The smile of someone delivering information without emotional attachment. The point is that Hale's finished. He won't serve 20 years because men like him never do. But he'll serve enough. His career is over. His legacy is ash. His name will be synonymous with corruption and cover-up. You won, Colonel. Not the way you wanted, not clean, but you won. Doesn't feel like winning. That's because winning rarely does. Victory's just the least bad outcome in a series of terrible choices. She handed him a folder. This is everything we've been able to develop independently. Following leads from your video, corroborating evidence, witness testimony from people who were too scared to come forward until they saw you do it first. It's enough to prosecute Hale without relying on your illegal evidence. Thomas opened the folder, saw names he recognized, operations he'd participated in, crimes he'd witnessed, all documented with the kind of meticulous detail that federal prosecutors loved. Why are you giving this to me? Because Captain Brennan's going to trial, because she's going to fight, because she's going to need ammunition, and I'd rather she have facts than martyrdom. Give this to her lawyer. Let them use it to show that whatever crimes you committed pale in comparison to the crimes you exposed. That won't keep her out of prison. No, but it might reduce her sentence. Might turn 5 years into 2. Might give her a chance to rebuild her life when this is over. Sarah paused. Your friend, Martinez. He was Force Recon. Served in 3 wars. Died trying to protect you. That kind of sacrifice deserves to matter. Make sure it does. The car stopped outside a hotel in Arlington. Not fancy, clean, the kind of place business travelers stayed when someone else was paying. Rooms prepaid for a week. After that, you're on your own. I'd suggest Montana. I'd suggest keeping your head down. I'd suggest you build that Veterans Center into something that helps more people than Hale ever hurt. Sarah's expression softened slightly. You're a good man, Colonel. You made bad choices, followed bad orders. But underneath all that, you tried. That counts for something. Thomas climbed out of the car, stood on the sidewalk holding a folder full of evidence and a future full of uncertainty. What about Natasha? She killed 6 contractors, federal crimes on American soil. We're looking for a Russian national named Natasha Volkov in connection with several deaths. We will continue to look. We will not find her. Some ghosts are better left as ghosts. The car drove away. Thomas stood in the Arlington afternoon and felt the weight of the folder in his hands, felt the weight of choices made and roads not taken, felt the peculiar lightness that came from surviving when you'd been certain you wouldn't. He called Ava's lawyer, arranged a meeting, delivered the folder with instructions to use everything. Then he checked into the hotel room and slept for 14 hours straight, dreamless, deep, the kind of sleep that came from having finally stopped running. 3 months later, Thomas stood in a courtroom in Washington and watched Ava Brennan receive her sentence. The trial had lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution had been thorough. The defense had been better. They'd used Sarah Chen's evidence. They'd called witnesses. They'd painted a picture of a Marine officer who tried to do right in a system designed to protect wrong. The jury deliberated for 8 hours, found her guilty of criminal trespass and conspiracy, acquitted her of attempted assault, acquitted her of every felony that carried serious time. The judge looked like she wanted to acquit her of everything, but couldn't quite square the law with her conscience. Captain Ava Brennan, you have been found guilty of criminal trespass and conspiracy to commit criminal trespass. These are serious crimes that undermine the rule of law and set dangerous precedents. However, the court recognizes the unique circumstances of your case, recognizes that you acted from a place of genuine belief that justice had failed, recognizes that your actions, while illegal, exposed legitimate crimes that needed exposure. The courtroom was silent. Thomas sat in the front row, had been there every day, watching, supporting, being the family Ava didn't have. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, with credit for time served, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. It is my hope that you will use this time to reflect on the difference between justice and vengeance, and to understand that the ends, however noble, do not always justify the means. 2 years, with time served in good behavior, maybe 18 months. Ava stood at attention like she was receiving orders from a commanding officer. Didn't flinch, didn't react, just accepted the sentence with the same discipline she'd shown through the entire trial. They let Thomas speak to her briefly before the marshals took her away. 5 minutes in a holding room, enough time to say the things that mattered. 18 months, he said, you'll be out before you know it. I know. And when I get out, the center better still be standing. It will be. We've got 47 of the veterans in residence, job placement programs helping 23 find work. Counseling services are booked solid for the next 6 months. It's growing. Good. Keep growing it. Make it matter more than I do. You matter, Ava. I matter because I tried, because I stood up, because I showed other people it's possible to fight back even when the odds are impossible. That's legacy. That's what my father wanted. That's what Martinez died for. The marshal knocked on the door. Time was up. They were always running out of time. I'll visit, Thomas said, every month. We'll keep you connected, keep you involved. No, you focus on the work. Focus on helping people. I'll be fine. Prison's just another deployment. Just another test. I've passed worse. She hugged him. Quick. Fierce. The kind of hug that said everything words couldn't. Then she was gone. Led away in handcuffs to begin serving time for crimes she'd committed to expose crimes that were worse. Thomas walked out of the courthouse into Washington sunshine. The city looked the same as it always had, marble and limestone and the slow grinding of power against principle. But something had changed. Something small and fragile but real. Senator Richard Hale had been sentenced the week before. 15 years, no parole, maximum security. His appeals had failed. His money couldn't buy what had been lost. His name would be remembered alongside other cautionary tales about ambition without conscience. It wasn't perfect, wasn't enough, but it was something. Thomas flew back to Montana the next day, drove from the airport to the Veterans Center, pulled up to find 47 people working, healing, building lives from the wreckage of war. Found Danny, the kid from Iraq with shrapnel in his leg, running the job placement program like he'd been born to it. Found other volunteers, other veterans, other people who'd needed second chances and were using them to give second chances to others. He found a letter waiting on his desk. No return address, handwritten. The kind of handwriting that suggested military training and European education. Colonel Brennan, I have been watching from a distance. Saw the trial, saw the verdict, saw what you are building. It is good work. Better than killing. Better than revenge. Perhaps better than I deserve to witness. I am leaving America, going somewhere warm where ghosts like me can pretend to be human. But before I go, I wanted you to know that the girl, the 12-year-old who died in the mountains, she would have liked what you are building, would have wanted to help, would have believed that broken people can build beautiful things if given the chance. Thank you for showing me this is true. Natasha. Thomas read the letter twice, then burned it in the fireplace. Watched the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. Let the past be past. Let the ghosts rest. 6 months later, he stood at Ray Martinez's grave. The stone was simple. Name, dates, rank. The only words that mattered carved beneath. He died so others could live. Thomas placed flowers at the base, stood in the Montana wind that smelled like snow and pine, and the particular emptiness of high country. Stood and remembered 60 years of friendship. Remembered Quezon in Kandahar and a dam in Montana where one old man had decided his life was worth less than his brother's. We did it, Ray. Not perfect, not clean, but we did it. Hale's in prison. Ava's serving time, but she'll be out soon. The center's helping people, making a difference. It's not much, but it's something. It's enough. The wind was the only answer. Thomas had stopped expecting anything else. He walked back to his truck, drove to the center, spent the afternoon helping a young Marine fill out job applications, spent the evening in a group therapy session, listening to men talk about nightmares and guilt and the distance between who they'd been and who they'd become. Spent the night in his cabin, alone with thoughts that were clearer now than they'd been in 50 years. Ava called once a week, collect from federal prison in West Virginia. They talked about small things, about the weather, about programs at the center, about books she was reading and plans she was making for when she got out. They didn't talk about regrets or second-guessing or whether it had been worth it. Some questions didn't have answers. Some answers didn't need questions. On the 1-year anniversary of Martinez's death, Thomas received a package. No return address but postmarked from Argentina. Inside, a photograph. Natasha Volkov standing in a field with a group of children. Teaching them, it looked like. The children held rifles, but they were learning to shoot clay targets, not people. Learning discipline and focus and the precision that came from controlling breath and heartbeat and fear. A note was tucked inside the photograph. They call me teacher. It is strange. Good strange. I am learning that there are ways to be strong that do not require being deadly. The children laugh. I had forgotten what that sounded like. Thank you for reminding me that the person I was before the bullet was worth remembering. Perhaps worth becoming again. N. Thomas added the photograph to the memorial wall at the center. Martinez's picture hung there. Michael Reeves's picture. Ava in her dress blues at commissioning. Other faces. Other warriors who'd fought and bled and tried to build something better from the ruins of what they'd broken. The wall was growing. The center was growing. The work was growing. It wasn't redemption, wasn't forgiveness, wasn't anything except the daily choice to do slightly more good than harm, to help more than hurt, to build instead of destroy. 18 months after her sentencing, Ava Brennan walked out of federal prison in West Virginia. Thomas was waiting. Drove 8 hours to be there when she emerged. Didn't speak, just stood by the truck and waited while she processed out, collected her belongings, stepped into the sunlight as a free woman. She looked older, harder, the kind of hard that came from time spent in places designed to break people. But her eyes were clear, focused, the same eyes that had made an impossible shot to save a life instead of taking one. Ready to go home? Thomas asked. I've been ready for 18 months. Let's go. They drove north, through West Virginia, through Pennsylvania, through the long, empty spaces that connected one life to another. Didn't talk much, didn't need to. Some things were understood without words. Montana opened up before them like a promise. Mountains and sky in the kind of space that made a person feel very small and very temporary. The Veteran Center sat on 10 acres now. They'd expanded, built more cabins, more therapy rooms, more space for people who needed it. Ava stood in the parking lot and looked at what they'd built, what she'd fought for, what 18 months in prison had bought. It's bigger than I remember. 83 residents now, job placement programs at 90% success rate, suicide prevention hotline fields about 40 calls a week. We're making a difference. Dad would be proud. Yeah, he would. They walked the grounds. Thomas showed her everything, introduced her to new volunteers, new residents, people whose lives had been changed because two people had decided truth mattered more than comfort. That night, they sat on the porch of Thomas's cabin, watching stars come out, watching the last light fade from the western sky, drinking coffee because Thomas had been sober for 2 years and counting, and some promises were worth keeping. What now? Ava asked. We keep building, keep helping, keep making sure Martinez and your father and everyone else who died didn't die for nothing. That's it? That's the plan? That's the plan. It's not glorious, not exciting, but it's real, it's useful. It matters to people who need it to matter. Ava was quiet for a long time. Then she said the thing Thomas had been waiting to hear for 18 months. I forgive you for not being there when I was growing up, for being drunk at my father's funeral, for all the ways you failed him and me and yourself. I forgive you because carrying that anger was crushing me, because holding on was killing what I'm trying to build. So I'm letting it go. I'm choosing to forgive. Thomas felt tears on his face. Didn't try to hide them. Didn't try to stop them. Just let them fall because some emotions were too big for pride. I don't deserve forgiveness. Nobody does. That's what makes it forgiveness instead of payment. You can't earn it. You can only accept it and try to be worthy of the gift. They sat in the Montana darkness and watched the stars wheel overhead. Watched the universe spin on without caring about human drama or human pain or human attempts at redemption. Watched and understood that their lives were small and temporary and utterly insignificant in the grand sweep of cosmic time. But to the 83 veterans living at the center, they weren't insignificant. To the people they'd helped, they mattered. To each other, they were family forged in fire and loss and the stubborn refusal to give up when giving up would have been easier. Tomorrow we start again, Thomas said. Tomorrow we keep building. Yeah, we keep building. We keep helping. We keep choosing to be better than we were. Every day, every choice. Every moment we get to decide whether we're defined by our worst mistakes or our best intentions. Ava raised her coffee cup to second chances. Thomas raised his to doing better than we did before. They drank, sat in silence, watched the night and the stars in the infinite Montana sky that held space for hope and grief and everything in between. Somewhere in Argentina, a woman who'd been a weapon was learning to be a teacher. Somewhere in a federal prison, a senator who'd been powerful was learning to be powerless. Somewhere in heaven or hell or whatever came after, Martinez and Michael Reeves and all the others were watching, judging, forgiving, or not. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the work. What mattered was the morning that would come. What mattered was choosing every single day to take the shot that helped instead of the shot that hurt. That was precision. That was wisdom. That was enough. Thomas Brennan stood and walked inside his cabin. Tomorrow would come early. There was work to do, people to help, lives to rebuild. The past was a weight he'd carried for 50 years. Tonight, finally, he set it down. Not because he'd earned relief, not because he deserved peace, but because he'd learned at last that the most important shot a sniper could take was the one aimed at redemption instead of revenge. The rifle stayed locked in the cabinet. The coffee stayed hot. The work continued. And in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, Thomas Brennan found something he'd stopped believing existed. Hope, not the loud kind, not the kind that made promises it couldn't keep, just the quiet, stubborn hope that tomorrow could be different if today's choices were right. That was the last precision, the only one that mattered anymore, the only one that ever had. Brothers and sisters who served. This one hit different, writing it. Ray Martinez's last words to Thomas, "I didn't die so you could lose." That's every warrior who ever covered a retreat, held a line, or took a round meant for someone else. I want to hear your story. What shot did you choose not to take? What brother saved your life? What mission still keeps you up at night? The comments below aren't just for likes. They're for remembering, for honoring, for making sure the next generation understands what we paid so they could sleep safe. Drop your story. Tag a veteran who needs to hear this. And if you're still fighting battles nobody sees, know this, you're not alone. That's why we built this channel. More stories coming. Some make you proud, some make you cry, all of them true to the code. Semper Fi, Hua, Aura, whatever branch, same brotherhood. Hit subscribe. Let's keep the circle unbroken.